and welcome to episode number 98 of Killer POV. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rob G. from Icons of Fright. Sitting with me is Elric Kane.
I have a Sybil Danning keyring
made by Rebekah McKendry.
Oh, you made it?
I made it.
Well, I just thought Sybil was at Monsterpalooza, wasn't she? So I thought you might have bought it from her.
Oh, no. We have like a badge maker for Fangoria.
That is so cool.
That's right.
I made you a Sybil one.
Becca made it for you.
I might get one of those piercing in my testicles now just to hang this off it, because I think that's what you would do.
Becca just gave me back my DVD copy of They're Playing with Fire.
Look how
Which was
different she looks
batshit.
in that.
Because if you watch this movie, the
Does that
front...
even hurt? Look at that face.
It doesn't.
Looks
The
like a
front of the
Photoshop.
cover, it totally looks like an 80s TNA comedy. Like if you've ever seen like the cover of Risky Business or any of those other ones,
But
it looks like a TNA graduate.
That's much better on the back.
But then it starts out like a really dramatic sexploitation, and then it turns into a slasher.
Yep.
It's a cool movie.
It's great.
It's
Loved
fun.
it.
With
Was that
Santa.
fun?
Yeah,
Or
it
you
was
thought it was
fun.
ridiculous?
I thought it was kind of ridiculous. I can't say it's a good movie.
Telling you,
but
jump cut screening.
I think that if you were watching it like with a group of friends, it would be freaking hilarious.
Yeah, but you banged one out on the boat scene, right?
What?
Nothing.
What?
Keep going. I think I said that you banged one out on the boat scene, right?
I don't know if no.
Come on.
No. I think that we need
Sybil
to
Danning,
discuss.
topless.
No. I think we need to discuss like later on in the show. I'm going to be predicting things. I may reference she kills in ecstasy. If I was going to even remotely
That's
think
your
about
thing?
a female that I think is outrageously attractive, Miranda Soledad.
I just
If we happen to talk, she kills in ecstasy. Vampiros Lesbo. She's the long black hair. If we were happen to talk about that film later on in the show, she's the one that I'm like, oh, she's really hot. Zoe Lund, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
But,
Zoe
I mean,
Lund's
I'm
cool.
looking at these pictures on the back, and this is Sybil at her absolute
Height.
finest. I don't even want to meet her right now. I just want to imagine her in 85.
Her finest were these faux James Bond photos she took when she tried to get into the Bond film. And she came runner-up to being, I think it's Octopussy, but they took this photo spread that are just incredible, where she's wearing these leather suits with guns, and it's so cool. But anyway,
all right.
Enough about Sybil.
I love 85
Actually, no,
Sybil.
not enough about it.
Not enough. Why haven't we had her on the show yet, guys?
There's reasons for that, too. Well, I've been driving for 8 hours today.
I know, that's ridiculous.
And I just feel all out of sorts, but...
Okay.
That's
What'd
fine.
you see?
I sort of, I'm gonna, the ones that are less horror, I'm gonna mention briefly because they all have horror. Going Clear, the Scientology documentary.
I watched that too.
Oh my
is
God, I
straight
want to
up
see that.
real deal, dread-inducing because it's real people. Like I watch something like The Sacrament or Jonestown, and I understand how cults form, and I get it. And when I watched Jonestown and read up about Jonestown in the old, I was like, yeah, 100 people, 200 people, 3. But when you get to Scientology and it's 40 years later or something, and they've got billions of dollars in the bank. They have people like Tom Cruise as their spokesman.
Yeah.
I just don't get it. I
It's
just
terrifying.
do not get it. And the guy who took over from him is even more terrifying. Yeah. It's such a fun documentary. Everyone's been saying, the book's better, the book's better. That's great. There's a reason why the movie had to leave certain things out, because you're more open to being sued in a film if you don't back it up than in a book. So, I think it's really fantastic, but it actually is scary. Like, to me, it operates kind of like a horror film. There's moments in that where I'm just going, oh, Jesus, what is going on? Like, who are these people? Anyway, it's a fascinating movie. I also listened on the whole car ride up and down, so I listened to the entire thing. I've been talking about Jinx for a long time. Mm-hmm. I missed the cereal boat where cereal was the thing.
I've been dying.
And it's really good. It's very different from the Jinx because it doesn't have a clear conclusion like Jinx does. Not many things could, but it's really good. I mean, literally, I listened to 6 hours on the way up and 6 hours on the way down to San Francisco. But fascinating, and it reminded me in a weird way, like if Twin Peaks was an audio investigation thing where somebody had gone, oh, a woman called Laura Palmer was killed. Let's try to figure out what happened in this town. Yeah. These are the different sides of it, and what do you think? That's what it felt like to me, without the weird surrealness. Really fascinating, though. And we're just living in an age, and actually, to be honest, this sounds weird, but because I don't really listen to a lot of podcasts, per se, like ours, it really helped me kind of understand why some people who listen to this sometimes say to us, I want even longer episodes. Mm-hmm. I think it's probably the people driving. Yeah. And I know one's a trucker, but I get that now because, anything to make the time suddenly just fly by.
And it does feel like time is going a lot faster when you're driving and listening to a podcast.
If you were doing dishes, it wouldn't be quite the same or something. But anyways, and then I watched a documentary called Lost Soul, which we're going to discuss later.
Yeah, I watched that too and loved it.
I'm flying through the ones I don't want to say too much. Walking Dead, the series finale, ended the best season in recent years. A lot of people are on board with that. No, major spoilers type stuff, but it was just really strong to see them actually, the drama drama is actually getting really interesting.
Nicotero behind that one again.
Yeah, it was Nicotero, yeah. And it was a really good ending because it just kind of, it wasn't like everything's going to change next season. It was more like, oh, cool, what's going to happen? It was just a solid cliffhanger. The one new film that I saw that I just found out a second ago that Bekah also saw, so this was good, it's called Back Country. And I never watched things like that early on demand because they cost like $8.99, but when I'm at someone else's house, I'm all about it because I charged it to the father-in-law rather, and I watched it late night. I hadn't even heard the title, but it was like the big film that it was the film they were promoting on VOD as the main thing they're promoting. So I was like,
I've never heard of it.
I hadn't heard of it either.
I hadn't heard of it either until somebody was like, "Hey, let me show you the trailer," and then I was like, "Okay."
Yeah, it's or nothing, okay. A couple of things that are interesting about this film is number one, and most importantly, it's shot like a real movie, and it's got all the hallmarks of saying that a year ago would have been 100% found. In fact, it's very similar to Willow Creek or something. And instead, they actually shoot it like, it's a beautiful little film. It's very thin on plot, on character. It's, a couple, it says based on true story, a couple go in the woods and they're going to a part of the park that they're not really meant to. And it's called Back Country. And there's a grizzly bear in it. I guess it's a true story about that there are man-eating bears out there. But there's one scene in the middle of this film that, I guess because nothing really happens in the first 45 minutes. This is and then there's 5 minutes in the middle. That was so, I'm not a big animal attack movie guy because usually the part where the animal attack isn't that great. This is stellar. That moment is breathtaking, scary, disturbing. What you're left with is just holy, yeah. And then the movie kind of just wraps up really quickly after that, and it's a little disappointing in that way. I would definitely say it's worth checking out for that alone, to be honest. And also just to see, hey, you can go shoot movies. You don't have to turn it into a found footage just to shoot the movie. So I thought it was interesting, but especially that one sequence. It's rare I see a movie that I think's I'm lukewarm on, but it has something that's so strong right in the middle, which makes it hard to recommend, but also,
But it's got such a great scene.
It's so great. I mean, I can't underplay how I was like, holy shit. I didn't expect it,
Wow.
I don't know. And you obviously didn't like it, but.
I liked that segment. That was the thing. Yeah. Just for me, I liked that they didn't shoot it on found footage because this film is exactly what found footage would have been. A guy going into the woods with a girl,
really
and crazy shit happens. You would just automatically think it is now. But like you said, nothing really happens for the first 45 minutes except for stupid people doing stupid stuff in the woods. And if any of you guys who are listening live in places that actually have, large mass forest terrains that you can go hiking in or near the AT or in places with bears, the first 45 minutes are really going to piss you off as you watch them make every mistake that you never make. So it's a little taxing to get through that. But then when the particular scene with the animal attack happens, I was like, oh, fuck yeah, this is scary as shit. The gore in that scene was amazing. The way that it builds.
Don't tell too much about it. Just that there's something great in the middle.
It's great in the middle. And then, as Elric said, it just abruptly ends. So, it was just okay for me. And it was weird because I'd seen the trailer and the trailer made it look more like a suspense film. And that guy, there's a person who kind of gets involved in their trip early in the movie. And you think that if you watch the trailer, you think he's going to play a Harold
Pintry third person kind of
he's going to play a much larger role than he does. So that's kind of the movie I thought it was a third person interloper into the
Wouldn't surprise me if this film was a found footage at one point and then decide, because it doesn't have the third act, that's what you would do in a found footage, is not have a third act. They'd just be running.
It's and then shit the camera happened and then the camera falls.
It kind of feels like that in the third act, but it's not, and it's a really well shot movie. So if it had just had another, I don't know, it felt like it didn't really have, I feel like the scene we're talking about is the inciting incident, even though it's halfway through, and then it never had a third act or a peak, if you know what I mean. Which is unusual. I can't remember the last time I saw a movie like that. And then it ends 10
minutes later. It's just okay.
But it's interesting. It's on VOD right now.
The reason that because I'd seen the trailer and I was like, oh, okay, it doesn't look that bad. And then the reason that I ended up watching it was I read an article, and I can't remember which magazine or website it was for, but it was talking about how the new hot movies right now are It Follows Spring and Back Country, and that's what the pattern that all indie films are going to be following.
What does it mean by pattern, though? Does it mean distribution pattern?
It was talking about what scares us now, and that those three are the example of what scares us now, and that oftentimes it's ambiguous. That's the big thing about these three movies, is that what scares us through the bulk of them is kind of ambiguous.
What's ambiguous about Back Country?
Well, I think for the first
maybe,
part it is, but it gets,
I send me that article.
Okay.
Yeah, I hate articles like that. It's just nonsense. This is what's hot now. You know, they pick the 3 movies that people are talking about. And it's like, everyone's going to be doing this now. It's like, no, they're not.
And I will say that
I don't see any spring rip-offs coming out anytime soon.
Of those 3 movies, the only thing that I can say is that they're all very subdued horror. Because even like It Follows, even when she knows that something really fucking scary that's going to kill her is following her, she's still just very much like, well, what's going on? What is it? I mean, she never is like, what the fuck is happening to me? She's never terrified.
So
None
it's different
of these
from the
movies
Scream
have
Queen
this.
or the final girls running through. Yeah, no, that is different.
If you were to make It Follows in the 80s, it would be a very much a lot of screaming, you know, oh my God, what's going on?
Be Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
It would be a far better movie.
So
Not a far
it would be a much louder film, I'll say. It would be a much louder and over the top with acting. The characters would have a lot more charisma than they do. Whereas in It Follows, they're just very flat. And even when there is terror coming, they might scream, run away, and then they just kind of get depressed about it. So, yeah, it's a different type of movie, but that's what they're saying that this is lending itself to. But
I think that's where you can tell David Mitchell isn't really like a horror guy. It feels like he's not borrowing from the tropes of those kind of characters, which you've seen a million times. He's borrowing more from like the indie world or Larry Clark and people like that. It's like that's where he's taking those characters.
Bad shit happens, they run, and then it cuts to them like depressed in a car.
Yeah.
Wait, you know what's funny? I got some text messages earlier today from Blake Regal, who's a friend of ours and a listener. And
I called him Blake Edwards on the show one time. Let's keep that going.
Blake Edwards Regal.
You.
And he said he loves the interviews. He thinks we do the best interviews and have a good show. But he said he suggested this. I thought that was kind of funny. He's like, you should try to get like a group of random like kids between the age of like 14 and 17 and have them on to talk about horror. Just to see what how they watch and consume horror, because that's essentially the age that we start. You know, we watched them at that age too, and that's what we got into.
We shouldn't mind some of our friends' kids.
Yeah,
but do we care is the question. No, I mean, in all honesty, this is a show about horror viewpoint.
But ultimately, we're also filmmakers and writers too. And when I write or make films, I'm making them for a more general audience than just
I don't really think
Elric.
I don't really think about the audience. I'm not thinking like, how do you define something for a group of 14-year-olds? I think that's where film dies.
But that is where the industry is always pinpointing. How do you sell something? Make it for 16-year-olds.
Oh, that's how you sell something, but that doesn't.
But it'd be nice to hear their opinion.
I would love to.
We'll
Elric can be the curmudgeon. Ken Hanley called you on that this week when he was like, and by the time you guys got to the video games review.
What was the movie I didn't like? I can't remember. It was Jerry Smith loved it. I can't remember what it was.
No, there were like a few movies that both were like, whatever. But whatever.
No, I mean, that's true. It's like, I think you can't stay in this field of interest for that long.
I mean, I've taken a huge genre break of this. I mean, I have a very few select things I want to talk about, but I've been pretty much like watching like comedy shows and watching different types of films, because after a while you do get a little burnt, especially on dark material, and you kind of want to have fun. So,
I've been actually, most of my list this time is sci-fi, but I'll call them fringy horror. But that's kind of where I've been. The Aliens kind of wet my palate for my sci-fi stuff.
What happens at 98 episodes in? It all starts to crumble.
And by the way, on Twitter, since you're probably listening, freaking Ryan Turek tried to call me out for saying maybe occasionally, once in a blue moon, we'll do an episode on its director, filmmaker. And he was just like, filmmaker series, what the hell? Where did you get that idea? I gave him full credit for it on the show. I'm not saying that we're going to copy the
we haven't even done it yet.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe we won't do it at all.
Well, maybe we'll do more obscure directors than they were picking.
Exactly.
Or maybe we'll have Ryan on for one of them.
Yeah. Well, I asked him that, and he said, "Whoa." I was like, "What director do you want to do that you haven't done?" He's like, "Whichever one me and Clark didn't do already." I was like, "Oh, whatever."
How many did they do? A few?
I don't know.
Yeah,
several, I would think.
Hey guys, I saw some films this week.
Go.
So I watched Faults, which I'm sure you've seen because AJ's in it.
I haven't seen it
because I want to see this.
I haven't seen it yet.
AJ's in it for like the first 10 minutes.
I know he's in the trailer too.
Really good. I gotta say, that was one of my favorite films I've seen this year so far. I liked it better than It Follows.
I wish I'd seen it first, because now I feel like I'm going to hate it, but I thought I was going to love it.
You're going to like it, Elric.
Okay.
You are.
Right.
Well, how can we agree? How is this possible?
Because we do agree occasionally.
You're right.
Occasionally.
All right.
No, this was one I was riveted through the entire thing, and I call this fringy horror because you don't really get the grasp of what's happening through most of the film. It's kind of one of those things where like it's like red, white, and blue. Where in the last 5 minutes you're like, holy fuck!
Is it like hard candy at all? Not the setup, but the two people in a room, but still there's tension. That's all I know.
Kind
I
of.
like hard candy for that reason.
But the tension gets broken down, which makes them both very endearing.
Okay.
But yeah, it's one character. His job is to rehabilitate cult members, and two parents pay him to rehabilitate their daughter.
You ever see Holy Smoke?
I have not seen Holy
Harvey
Smoke.
Keitel does that same thing, but it's more of a comedy. It's a good movie, though.
This is definitely, that's weird because I was getting ready to say it's definitely not a comedy. It's very heavy, but no, it's a fucking black comedy. There's some hilarious moments in there. Also some very shocking stuff. So yeah,
Did you see it as a screener or online?
I saw it online. I rented it off Amazon for $7. Cool. So yeah, I absolutely loved it. And that was one that was recommended to me. And I thought it was definitely one of my favorite films of the year so far. So I highly recommend that one. I watched Playing with Fire, which we already talked about. I watched Predestination.
Yeah, we've been hearing great things about it.
Which was recommended to me by Mike Mendez at Horror Trivia last time. He gave, like, when we were sitting there drinking afterwards, he was like running off a list of cool shit he'd seen lately, and he said Predestination. It's got the girl from Jezebel, and I didn't like Jezebel that much, but I love her.
You mean the Ethan Hawke film we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's got the redhead girl from Jezebel. I don't remember her name off the top of my head, but she is phenomenal in this. And it's a
Sarah Snook.
Sarah Snook. I love her. So she needs to do more genre films.
And this is by the brothers who made The Dead and the cool Ethan Hawke vampire film.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I never heard of it, but I'm looking at the artwork now, and it seems familiar.
It's a really cool concept. It's a time travel film. Again, I'll call it fringy horror because it's got some horror elements, but it's definitely not like genre centered. But it's cool enough that I had to mention it on the show. And then I watched another sci-fi film, which is fringy, The Nines, which I'd never seen before.
With Ryan Reynolds?
Yeah.
I don't know what that film is, but I've seen the cover a lot.
It goes, you think it's
I thought it was a sports movie, to be honest.
See, that's why I never watched it. You think it's an anthology, but then you realize at the end that they're all interconnected in this kind of cool way.
And he plays multiple characters,
Yeah, he
right?
plays a character in each one of the anthologies, and then you realize at the end that they're all interconnected. Again, these aren't horror films per se. They're just kind of fringy stuff, but they're all science fiction, which was kind of my palette for the week.
Somebody wrote something about Predestination saying like it was a real shame that's one of those perfect examples of not having theatrical. Where it goes VOD. No one really knew what it was, but it's one of those movies that could have done actually really well and been effective on screen.
It's very, at least on my television, I do have to say, like, it was confusing enough that because it is a time travel movie and you really want to keep the timeline straight, I watched it twice because I had like a 48-hour rental and I was like, well, I'm still confused by it. You know what? Fuck it. I'll just watch it again. So I watched it twice to be able to get it, but watching it twice made me appreciate how smart it is even more. So
cool.
It worked.
Yeah, I want to see that one for sure.
But then I did watch Back Country, which was my big horror, and Playing with Fire. So yeah. And
Cool.
The Lost Souls doc.
Well, for me, I just wanted to talk briefly about Monsterpalooza just happened. It happens twice a year here in Burbank, and it's, again, still one of the best conventions out there. It was pretty fun. I had a really good time. It'll play into our guest later, but one of the most surreal things that happened was I was meeting with some friends at a diner before heading over there in the afternoon. And who walks in but David Scow, our friend and former guest, who just happens to come to this diner. And I'm like, where are you going? He's like, I'm going to Monsterpalooza. And I was like, oh, I'll give you a ride. And I dropped him off on the side with Robert Parigi, who's sitting there talking to Richard Stanley. And I'm just like, God, I love this ridiculous town because I'm talking about David Scow at a Monsterpalooza convention in front of Richard Stanley in Burbank. It's just totally random. But no, it was a really good show. Again, the best thing about it is always the museum, which, obviously because we're in LA, a lot of the effects houses are already out here. And at Monsterpalooza, they do a thing called the museum where they kind of set up props and things from actual movies and things like that. The coolest thing I saw was from Westworld. There was
I saw a photo of it.
Yeah,
a life-size thing of the gunslinger, who is played by Yul Brynner.
Yeah, Brynner.
And if you stood next to it long enough, the face automatically opened up and showed the robot behind it.
What?
It was really badass because it looked very realistically like him standing there.
That's a badass movie. People should watch that.
Oh, Westworld's great. Oh, yeah.
It's going to be a TV show, I think, this year.
They're making it into a TV show.
Yeah.
I caught it on a double bill with the Terminator at the New Bev a while back, which is awesome.
That's a great double.
That was a cool display. They had a life-size creep show ticket taker booth, I guess. It's the front cover of the guy, of the skeleton guy with the ticket, but like a life-size version of it. It was
cool.
really freaking cool. That and Evil Ed from Evil Dead 2 with the Book of the Dead. I took a bunch of pictures and posted them on the Icons of Fright Facebook, so if you want to take a quick look at some of the cool stuff there. But great show. You should definitely make an effort to come out to the next one in September.
That's
totally worth the trip.
Of Monsterpalooza?
Yeah. But Son of It is seemed to, it's starting to, I think both of them are starting to grow a lot bigger.
That's the first time I've missed it in a long time.
Yeah.
I think since it started. So how many years old is it?
I think it's 5 now.
Yeah, I think that's it started. The first one was when I first moved here.
When I first moved here too, yeah. In terms of stuff to watch, the only thing that I kind of deviated from in terms of films is on Netflix. I discovered a series. It's an A&E series called The Killer Speaks, and I'm fascinated by true crime, but at the same time really disturbed by it. Like I don't like real life violence, obviously, but it is a series where they each episode singles out a specific heinous murder or crime, and they actually talk to the killer about it. And it's a little unsettling because it's an interview with the killer staring straight at camera.
Oh, man.
So you are like locking eyes with this person, and they have a psychologist in there who analyzes the interview and talks about it and kind of explains the psychopathy behind this person. And
this would disturb the shit out of me. Like, I could not watch this.
I had to really space it out. I couldn't, it's not a show you marathon, but there was about 5 or 6 episodes, and I'd find myself watching one every other day just to be like, oh, it'd be interesting because, especially when you're trying to be a writer, you want to hear about stories. And what I always find fascinating, especially about these true stories, like, we watch movies and always think like, oh, that would never happen. Oh, that's so convenient, whatever. But you hear these real life stories and the simplicity and how some of it plays out is kind of amazing. It's like, you're like, I can't believe that that's how this happened and how long these people, how they got away with it for X period of time or whatever the case is. So I found that really fascinating. Again, not really a pleasant thing to watch, but I broke it up with Parks and Rec as well. So
if you're normal in the world, you can get away with anything. That's the dark thing. It's the people who, we look for. The people look like a fish, Albert Fish. They look weird and you're looking for them. But people like Ted Bundy, it's just, if they don't want to be caught and could change up their pattern, they would never be caught.
And a lot of those stories are like that. In terms of films, I have a copy here from Scream Factory of Carrie. To double bill with The Rage Carrie 2, but it is the 2002 TV version of Carrie, which is technically the first remake of it. And I remember, I haven't seen either feature in a really long time. I of course love the original Carrie, Brian De Palma, one of his best, Stephen King, and I saw the Angela Bettis Carrie when it came out, and I remember I was really disappointed at that period. The Rage Carrie 2, I've always kind of liked it. I have a soft spot for it, although I haven't seen it in years. It's partly because Kat Shea directed it, and I love Kat. Kat did Strip to Kill, and she was in Psycho 3, so I have a little bit of a relationship with her from the Psycho legacy. But I really think it's smart that, when Scream Factory was on our show, I think the first or second time, they really tried hard to get the original Carrie, and I guess MGM just put out their own version. I think there's really smart pairing up these two movies because there's interesting things about both of them, whereas on their own, I don't think they would be strong releases, but it's neat to have them both together. And now I have all the Carrie movies. The thing that's fun about the 2002 version is it was written by Brian Fuller, who now, of course, is the showrunner on Hannibal. And this is kind of one of his early TV excursions. And it's not great, but I actually didn't think it was that bad either, revisiting it. The biggest problem is it looks like a TV movie. It's like it's got that weird way that it moves, which I assume it means it was shot in video. So in terms of the direction, it doesn't look great. And of course, they take a lot of liberties because it's TV and they updated it to 2002 with a lot of the references. The strongest thing about it, though, is you can't not look at Angela Bettis. I honestly think the way I see it is that there are 4 versions of the Carrie movie. Like, even though The Rage is a sequel, it's really just a retelling of Carrie and the remake. Of all of them, like obviously Sissy Spacek is the one we know. I think Angela Bettis could be the best Carrie in terms of what she's described as. I haven't seen the new one yet, but it's on Netflix Instant. I added it to my queue after watching that. And the other thing that I think benefits is a lot of times, and I know a lot of fans probably do this, when you decide to revisit a series and the remakes, you usually go in order. You're like, oh, I'm going to watch them all. You know what? I haven't seen Carrie, the original De Palma one, in quite a while. And I think that actually helped. Because, of course, if I watched them back to back, I'd be like, oh, it's the same movie. But because I only have a distant memory of it, I was able to enjoy this one a lot more. And again, focus primarily on Angela Bettis' performance. You know, the mother, Piper Laurie played the mother in the original. And that's amazing, unbelievable performance. The mother in this one isn't that good, and she's almost like a secondary character. But again, it's just about how great Angela is in it. And it's, she had just done May around the same time. I still think she's a really amazing actress. I mean, anytime she pops up, even in something like The Woman, I just think she's just a very unique and interesting and unlikely person that you would cast in something like that. And she's perfect as Carrie. So I think it's worth it to revisit because of the Brian Fuller connection and because it's Angela Bettis. And again, I think this package makes it kind of the ideal way to revisit both movies.
Yeah, I never saw it because it was a made-for-TV movie, and so I just kind of disregarded it.
Canadian production, so Catherine Isabelle from Ginger Snaps and American Mary, she's in it. There's a lot of familiar faces. You're like, oh, okay. So, yeah, it's interesting. And again, I strongly recommend, I did it with the Alien series. Like, I skipped 1 and 2. I have great memories. I've seen them a million times. I went right to the Alien 3 assembly cut and was able to enjoy it a lot more without the stigma of watching them in order. So that's the best way to kind of revisit or see remakes.
And are they still trying to get a director's cut of the new one done? The new remake? Is that
I really don't know what the hell the story is with that, because the director's not asking for it.
I keep hearing rumors. It's definitely popped up on a couple of message boards that I go to, that there's like a grassroots group fighting to get a director's cut of the remake.
But why?
Yeah. I don't know what type of studio drama there was. Unfortunately, I did not know any of the
minutes. That's all I would need to know. I just want to see where it's set, what the tone of it is.
Well, again, I was surprised. It's on Netflix since, and I was surprised. And I'm going to get to it eventually. Again, I want to space these out, so I'm going to revisit The Rage Carrie 2, and then eventually I'll watch the other remake. But yeah, that's what I saw, and I was at a
enjoyed it. VHS sale. DVD, like this really nice store, every Criterion, like for like $4, and I just didn't have enough money. But I would look up things. I was in there, and anything that wasn't on Netflix, I was buying, and so that's where I saw a copy of Boxing Helena, and I was like, that has to be on Netflix, and it wasn't, and you couldn't even get the disc anymore; it's out of print. So I was like, oh, getting that in case we have to watch that before we head to Texas.
We have to prep for Boxing
also
Helena.
Faces of Death, and a couple of those. It was a weird Reflecting Skin things. That's hard to find.
That is really,
it was on DVD, an American DVD. I was like, okay, interesting.
Where is this place?
It was in San Francisco. That was where I just was, but
you got me really excited for a second, Elric. What the fuck?
But so yeah, we have to do our Boxing Helena watch. I kind of want to do like an audio commentary with the three of us the first time we're all watching it, and like not sure if we've seen. That's one of those movies I don't even remember if I've seen it before. I've seen scenes from it, and so I think that could be.
I've definitely seen the boxing scene or post boxing, but I don't think I've seen the first part.
Oh yeah, I definitely want to get Jennifer Lynch in here at some point. I think she's a really interesting filmmaker. Cool. Well, also we did want to put a plug for anyone to view a film called, that we've mentioned a couple times, Lost Soul, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley, because it pairs really well with Jodorowsky's Dune. They came out, coming out similar times, but they're very different. But the strength of both films is ultimately the subject. You know? And they really elevate. And we are lucky enough to have that subject.
And get this, we actually even got a message from one of our friends on Facebook saying, Michael Veers, we're calling you out, saying, oh, I'd really love a future episode with Richard Stanley. Guess what, Michael?
The future is here.
Oh, wow, there we go. Welcome back to the show. And we're here to talk about a wonderful documentary that all of us have seen and have talked about quite a bit leading up to the show. Lost Soul, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau. Here is the director of that, David Gregory. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And the great Richard Stanley as well.
Well, it's a pleasure being here, sir.
Thank you. The doomed man of the doc. But
no, the doomed journey.
The doomed
journey. Man.
That's
good.
Well,
I've kind of felt doomed all my life. But it's just a personal thing.
But thank you so much for coming to the show. I mean, a lot of people have mentioned Richard's name since we started, and we're almost up to 100 here, so that's kind of crazy. But I want to touch on stuff to do with Severin a little bit later in the show. But I have here your release of Hardware, which is a stellar Blu-ray release. Not only because it looks fantastic, but the documentary that's on there is pretty great, and all of it, well, not all of, but 3 of Richard's short films. I always love seeing stuff like that. So my question, I guess, starts, is this where you initially got in touch with him?
I was actually at, I think it was the world premiere of Hardware. Was that the one at Shock Around the Clock was the world premiere?
It would have been 1990.
Yeah, 1990,
Okay.
yeah. So I was actually aware of Richard right from the beginning.
Excellent.
And it was a horror film festival in London that showed a lot of other premieres as well. So I'd always been aware of Richard and his work. And, when Island of Dr. Moreau was announced, it was something that was very exciting for horror fans in the mid-90s because it was a pretty lame period for horror. And I just thought the idea of Richard doing, this really quite perverse story in essentially a mainstream company was pretty exciting. And then the rest is history. Fast forward a bit later, yes, we got the rights to Hardware, and I met Richard then. We did the documentary for that, and then after that we worked together on the Theatre Bizarre, which I was one of the producers on and co-directed with Richard and
The Mother of Toads, right?
I love
several
Mother of
other
Toads segment.
directors. Yes, and that's really where we sort of got to know each other quite well, working together and becoming friends. And I went to visit Richard in Montsegur a couple of times, and that's sort of where we started talking about this subject.
I had a question. It always in the little documentaries it says you're from the UK, but your accent strikes me as South African. Where were you born and raised?
Yeah, at this point I've become truly cosmopolitan. And I was actually born in South Africa.
Okay.
Good call,
I didn't do any research on that. That's purely my...
No, he said that like a week.
I've been listening to Cricket for 2 weeks, so I'm good.
Yeah, very good. So, born in South Africa. Okay. My parents insisted I was British upper class. Went back to Britain when I was 16, discovered I wasn't British. Eventually managed to get myself a British passport. I'm now living in France. And, passionate supporter of Montsegur and the Occitan cause, the first cause I've ever been patriotic for.
Okay, interesting. And so you ended up, your film career started in England or in South Africa? Were you first trying to get that first feature made?
It would have started right from the top in South Africa.
Yeah.
It would have started with my dad bringing home a 60mm print of King Kong when I was 4 years old, and me probably being very taken with the Carl Denham character in King Kong, and then getting more involved, reading about Marion C. Cooper and the motto of his production company, distant, difficult, and dangerous, and the idea of going to places where no one had ever been before and bringing back images of things that people had not seen and showing it to them in the safety of their own homes.
You've lived that interest. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, I know. There's something about your films that they feel like a lot of really, especially Hardware, there's so many big ideas and new visuals, crammed in an independent, that's kind of I imagine smaller budgeted film, but it's like overflowing with all these ideas. And it's interesting when you get to Moreau, it seems to be the reverse problem because you still have all these ideas, but because they're trying to put it on such a big canvas, I can see how you along the way could lose power doing that. When you were casting, did you have that gut feeling as soon as Brando got involved that it was going to be difficult?
Clearly.
Yeah.
Well, very, very often it was going to be a small movie, maybe $8 million.
Yeah.
And the original plan was to go with Jürgen Prochnow for Dr. Moreau as my choice.
I love those illustrations
Yeah.
where he looked kind of Christ-like.
Yeah,
The beard
it was
and the long...
Prochnow in the
Yeah.
Das Boot days would have been my ideal Moreau at that point.
Yeah.
And I think Ozzy Argento was going to be the cat lady.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. That's like a completely different film.
Yeah, it was the $8 million version. It was when it was still going to be a horror movie and it was still going to have at least R-rated sex.
I wish there was either a graphic novel with those original art or an animated version just so people could see, because it just was so rich with the illustration.
There will be next year.
Has that been announced yet?
Yeah, well, it has. We haven't got the artist on board yet.
Okay.
But it's
Whoever
with
did those
the
original
Humanoids.
arts.
Humanoids will be putting out a 3-volume graphic novel.
Of the original script?
Originally it was going to be the original script, and I went back and reread the original script and decided that after 20 years there was some considerable room for improvement.
Right.
So, I've now totally rewritten the beast. And it is now morphed into a 3-volume epic. The original story is pretty much the first volume. And then by going into a trilogy, it means the second book can be the backstory. So we finally get to meet the young Dr. Moreau and find out what happened in London and how he got corporate sponsorship, how he ended up on the island, what happened to the original human population of the island, and how it turned into the thing which it is when the castaway washes up. Then the third volume is what happens after Moreau dies and what happens to the Beast People from there onwards.
Wow.
Yeah,
in the documentary, I think one of the little things, and we don't want to, obviously, we've discussed before, we don't want to give away the whole story. Obviously, we're going to talk about kind of the myth that a lot of us had heard, which, the origin story of this. But little things like hearing the connection between your grandfather, Stanley, I believe it was.
Henry Morton Stanley.
Yeah, and Kurtz, the character from Apocalypse Now, kind of, by way of Hearts of Darkness. Was that something you were aware of? Was that something somebody had to, kind of key you in on about your family tree?
It took a while for me to get my head around that. I mean, I initially misunderstood Sir Henry Morton Stanley, and that when I was growing up, I thought he was slightly boring and a guy of a funny hat. And it took a while for me to actually zoom into the detail and read carefully about what had been going on back then. But he was, in fact, an extremely colourful character. And again, no one's quite sure what his nationality was. He came out of a Welsh workhouse, became a cabin boy, managed to work his way across to the US. His actual real name was Henry Rowlands. He took the name Stanley from the first family that he worked for when he landed in the US, became an American citizen, fought for the Confederacy in the Battle of Shiloh, got captured by the Yankees, became a Yankee, etc., became a war correspondent, went west, learned how to use a dugout canoe on the Missouri, and then got the job to go and find Livingston. And at that point in time was treated as an American explorer and flew an American flag on the expedition. He then got appropriated by the Royal Geographic Society. They knighted him in Britain. He became Sir Henry Morton Stanley. He then fell out with the Royal Geographic Society when they implied he might be lying about some of his
adventures,
journal entries, considering he was the sole survivor on the first 3 trips out. Stanley had a dismaying habit of always being the only white person to come back alive, which started to raise questions. He then got pissed off with them, defected from England, and started working for King Leopold of Belgium, and went off and founded the Belgian Congo, and was then responsible for polarizing the Hutu and Tutsi population, which led to the Rwandan genocide.
So when is Herzog's film coming out?
It would have to be about,
This is a whole nother thing.
would have to be about 4 Herzog movies.
There's no Kinski left. So.
It seemed pretty boring when I started at the off, and then when I started looking into it, I realized it was insane.
And when did the connection to Conrad appear to you? Or did somebody else make you aware of that connection?
It was pretty much a friend back in London had written their thesis on Heart of Darkness. It was a lady named Esky Thomas, who's Jeremy Thomas's wife, actually, who wrote her thesis on that book. And then, that started to, I guess, infest my life in some way.
But it had nothing to do with why Brando was cast in this film? Like nothing? Or is it just something in the cosmos?
Well, it helped Brando be interested in it. Right?
I guess it helped maintain his interest in the material, I mean, ultimately, Brando was cast in this film because Ed Pressman put $1 million in escrow.
Yeah.
Brando doesn't really read. He didn't really read. The trick was you had to park $1 million in the bank account and show the money, at which point he would then agree to be in the film, which would then enable you to use his name to go out there and set the project up, which was a pretty good deal, I thought.
There's many people in Hollywood that still work that way. Many.
But I very much doubt he read the script or did an awful lot of research into the backstory.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's such a complicated. The actual story is a lot more complicated than I was expecting, actually. Which I really loved the way you mapped it out, David. But my question, I guess, is I'd heard. I think this was just one of those stories that somebody had been told, and it's always more heightened about a director who then disappeared when he was off a project and reemerges at a campfire where everyone's dressed in costume, and then they tell him, "Oh, come with us," and get the costume. Of course, it doesn't necessarily play out like this. But could you tell us a little bit how you heard this story first, and what the context was that you heard it?
Yeah, I mean, I was still, in a sort of the horror underground in England at the time. Everything was kind of banned, so I was still talked to a lot of horror fans around the country at the time, and there was a lot of scuttlebutt about what happened on the island of Dr. Moreau. And of course, the big thing was I heard that Richard Stanley had snuck back onto the set in a dog mask, and it was never really confirmed or anything like that. It just became one of those crazy legends, And then, so I think this was one of the things that made me think that this might be, its own feature. I want to actually explore this entire story with everybody that I can find. Was the part of the interview where Richard, busted out the dog mask and actually showed it and told me the names of the people who had been able to smuggle him back onto the set. And it just so happened one of those guys had just got in touch with Richard a couple of weeks before through email or Facebook or something like that.
I think it was Twitter.
Twitter, yes.
What we call them the trader coincidence.
Yes, exactly. And basically, this guy was he had 3 jobs on the film. He was a production runner, he was an extra, and he was in the art department. Got fired from 2 of them, so kept on changing his name to get a job again.
Was he the one who drove
Palooza across the country? Yeah.
And also,
they're very colourful
Australians,
characters.
There's just always a slightly my favorite thing about Australian people, there's always a bit of a slightly subversive quality to them in any situation. They're always up for whatever, and I think that quality is quite important to pull off what they helped you do.
I just love the way he reacted to Frankenheimer when Frankenheimer yelled at him. I think that's one of the funniest things. Frankenheimer's like, "This is, you better have respect for me. Where's my script? Where's my script?" Oliver, and he's like, "Yeah, dude, whatever." It's like, I just brought it over here.
Because it's a totally different pace too, right, of life.
And that was also something why I wanted to get a bunch of the extras and crew people from Australia, because for them to have this huge production come to Cairns just must have been surreal. And they're just watching all this money being burnt essentially on this production, and they're having the time of their lives. They're just like, these guys are crazy, but we're going to ride along with it.
Sorry.
So did this stem from, were you interviewing him for one of the other docs for like Hardware when that story started to come out and you started to get the idea?
No, it was specifically for this. I mean, okay. I mentioned it to him that I wanted to do a documentary about Moreau, and I hadn't really considered it becoming its own entity. It might have been, an elaborate Severin blog post or an extra on something else that, maybe something else that we were going to do together. But it was really pretty early on in the interviewing process, because it was just me and my camera on his shelf. Basically, my little T3i was parked on his shelf, and then we just sat and talked, and it just kind of went on, became more and more labyrinthine and fascinating, and more people that I wanted to get involved and get their recollections. And it was definitely something that was like, this is a story that really needs telling properly.
How hard was it to hunt down all the extras that were Australian?
Well, in the extras, I actually started just going through IMDb to see if any of them had any contact information, which I don't think any of them had. But then to, I guess, the Australian version of SAG, I can't remember what it's called, but I asked for a few of them. Once I got in touch with one of them, which I think was Neil Young, was the first one. The Boar Man, and then he was still in touch with a few people because they'd made such a bond on this picture. Believe me, he put me in touch with the pig lady, Fiona Marl, and she always had a video camera on her. So that got me, 20 hours of footage. Wow. But I would say 19.5 of it was them hanging out and drinking and partying and karaokeing, and so there was a lot of that. But then there was the other stuff on the set. So then they introduced me to other people. David Hudson, the
Buffalo Man.
The Buffalo Man, yes.
Also a point of contact for the Aboriginal community in Kuranda.
That's right. But the other pig lady, there were 2 pig ladies, and the other pig lady, when she heard about the project, she was so excited and wanted to be a part of it and was writing me these long emails, and I'm coming through LA, so let's do it then, and then she got together with Fiona, looked at the behind the scenes footage, and was just horrified at what she was like on this, what she was up to, what she was doing, how, and she was just like, I'm a teacher now, I don't want my face or my name associated with this. So there was a couple of people that didn't want to be a part of it, but mostly they had some pretty vivid memories.
Wasn't some of it location just too hard to get somebody? Like I know Tim Morrison was the Kiwi actor. I remember that was his
I
first
kind of
one.
regret that I didn't try harder. I never. I didn't.
He probably strikes me as the kind of guy if he was in LA, and you were here.
Yeah, but I didn't go to Australia to do those. There were 3 locations we shot in Australia: Cairns, Brisbane, and Sydney for those interviews. And I just contacted local people. In the case of Cairns, in the case of Brisbane, it was the film school. And I said, have you got some enterprising young students who want to shoot some interviews for a feature, and they did a great job.
And David Thewlis, it's Thewlis. I wasn't watching for it, but it wasn't until the movie ended, and I was just saw it last night where I wasn't sure if he was even mentioned.
He isn't, but that's actually, we're actually going to, just before the DVD comes out, because this is the most commonly asked questions, and it's obviously an oversight. But there was a reason I didn't have him in there, because we'd asked him, and he'd made it quite clear that he didn't want anything to do with it. So we just kind of ended the Rob Morrow story with him wanting to get the hell out of there. But obviously that's an unresolved story arc, because everybody knows that Thewlis is in it. So anyway, the version on the DVD is going to be slightly longer in a couple of places, and one of them is whereby we return to the poster where Rob Morrow disappears and David Thewlis comes back up, and that's it.
Because I'll tell you, this is the weird thing. I never heard any of these stories about this film, but when I was young, I think this is the first film I had ever seen in my life where I knew something had gone wrong. Ever. And right? I knew it because of the casting, and I knew it as soon as David Thewlis was the lead, and I thought he was, Naked's one of my favorite performances, but I knew when I saw him in this kind of a movie that something was wrong as that lead character, and then I saw Val Kilmer pop up halfway through, and I thought, something must have happened, because Val Kilmer would have been the lead, because it's right after Heat, right? Like the year after Heat. And it was literally one of the first times in a major Hollywood film. The whole thing with big Hollywood films is you don't see the edges of them. They just wash over you and you're entertained. You walk out. This was the first one I was watching it. I remember going, oh, wait a minute, this is wrong. Yeah. And I couldn't put my finger off. Well, when Brando shows up and spends the rest of the movie with the little guy.
But that's all it's funny thing is about that is that that's the best stuff in the finished movie. Right, is all that crazy stuff that Brando did. And, but obviously it made it just seem like a wacky mess. But that's the only stuff you remember.
When I first saw this movie, I was actually in college. I think it was a freshman or a sophomore. In the literature class I was in, we were actually reading the story, and so
and the
professor showed it to us. It was like, "What do you guys think?" And we were like, "Why is he white? What's with the ice bucket? And who's the little dude?" Yeah. And it was so confusing to try to figure out how they took that story and get from there. But it made for a really good discussion in my freshman.
Did they show you either of the other versions to compare and contrast?
Yeah, we watched the one from, I want to say, the 40s.
30s, Island of Lost Souls.
The Lost Souls one, Criterion.
Yes.
Yeah, the one that Criterion has out now.
Yes.
Yeah, we watched that one as well.
Richard's on that as well.
Oh, excellent.
It was actually that interview on the Criterion edition was set up by Evan Husney, who used to work for Severin and was working for Severin at the time. And I was like, I'm doing a documentary on, so don't, if he can talk about, don't interview him about his experience on Moreau, interview him specifically about Island of Lost Souls. He's like, yeah, dude, no problem. And then basically they went into that story. I'm like, Evan, what the hell are you doing? And he'd already quit at that point.
Oh, okay.
For Richard, were you at all hesitant about talking about the story or about the idea of a documentary? Because obviously, I mean, now in retrospect, it's interesting because when people mention your movies like Hardware or Dust Devil, I remember Hardware being promoted in Fangoria as a little kid and being so excited about the film. So you've kind of got a cult following, so to speak. But, this is obviously a very traumatic, dark time in your life. I mean, and now it's a whole documentary about it. So were you hesitant at all about going back there? And I mean, how does it feel to kind of watch the film now, seeing this part of your life, with a little bit of distance?
Well, I did spend 20 years trying to get away from it. Really, I think during that time period, pretty much every single interview I ever did, at some point towards the end of the interview, no matter what the topic was, someone would have to ask, what really happened on the island of Dr. Moreau, or what was Brando really like? And I would always scowl and kind of fume and give a short form answer. When David first interviewed me, I tried to, be as egalitarian, as nice about it as possible, and that in all the interview stuff I never named names or really
you didn't throw anyone under the bus.
No, I don't complain about anyone. So,
but it also makes you come across as somebody who's not like just sitting there bitter and gritting your teeth. I think that actually worked in your favor.
It seemed very endearing.
Yes.
Yeah, anyways, my first reaction when I saw the cut was I thought, shit, we're in trouble. My first reaction was to pencil the words "call lawyer" on the pad next to the computer after watching the link. It was only really when seeing it with an audience I realized, okay, people I find this funny. It works as black comedy, and I realized it was getting bigger laughs than anything else that I've ever been connected with. So I thought, okay, this could work. And as it became clearer that the various folk involved in the thing weren't going to cause us trouble, that the powers that be weren't going to sue us into oblivion, I started to feel a little bit easier about the whole experience. Of course, what has happened as a result is that, first of all, the Island of Dr. Moreau is back. Now is 3 graphic novels for next year, but the plan is then to develop the graphic novels onwards and back into a movie again. So the thing will slither back into multiplexes in about 4 or 5 years. As to whether this will be an improvement or not, I can't say. I mean, I did run into someone who'd been both on the Frankenheimer version and the Don Taylor, Burt Lancaster version, who said the only difference between the two of them was that on the Don Taylor version, everyone was drunk, whereas on the Frankenheimer version, everyone was on drugs. So whether the next remake will be any different, I don't know. It'll have presumably VFX, so it'll be a VFX hyena swine that will be slamming into a mangrove tree and laughing obscenely at me before biting my face off.
How much of the if you had filmed your first version of the script now, how much of that was actually used in the what ended up being Island of Dr. Moreau?
Well, I'm pleased to say none of it was used, which was
not even the structure and character structure by the end, or
only the basic characters from the Wells book. What they had was they used the set. So they kept the notion that it was updated by virtue of the fact they had to shoot on the set that had already been built and on the locations that had already been selected. Plus, they had to use the creature makeups. In that people had already been life cast, so they were locked into the cast and the location. But beyond that, nothing. None of those things are in the right order or in the right places. That's why you've got so many fabulous people like Tamara Morrison and Ron Perlman and Mark Dacascos, who are barely on screen. Who turn up for a split second and aren't used in any logical way because they're there. They're kind of trapped in the film, but no one knows anymore what they're there for. Or Tamara said that he only did the movie for one reason, which is that he gets to eat pussy. He doesn't anymore. His character does not get to eat fucking pussy. So the one reason that Tamara Morrison signed on the film was eliminated. The same happened with almost all of them. Almost every single one of those characters has lost their raison d'etre, their purpose for being there to begin with.
Right. The context, the context shifts while you're watching the movie, especially the German actor
Marco Hofschneider,
which is pretty shocking.
Yeah, no, he was terrific. I'm so glad. Because I just happened to be going to Berlin. We were visiting Buddy Giovinazzo, and I realized that that's where Marco might be, being from Germany, and so we just wrote to his agent and came right back and said yes, we met him at a beer hall the night before. He was just full of these just incredible stories, and as you saw in the documentary, he's quite the storyteller and very funny, but also he had a real story arc. He was so excited at the beginning. He had a great role, one of his first roles in Hollywood, if not the first, and just thought it was going to be fantastic for him, just as other people did, and obviously turned into absolutely nothing. And you guys reconnected in Oldenburg for the first time since it went down. He's a good chap, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a great guy. I would cast him again in a split second. It's a perfect casting for that character.
And now it's a pathetic character in the Frankenheimer movie. It really is. It's like, oh my God, he's such a wimp, and he's just doddering about in the background. What the hell?
His makeup is destroyed. Yeah. I mean, that was because of Val complaining the whole time he looks too much like a monster. You've got to turn him down and tone it down. So even his makeup is lame. I mean, another example is Bill Hootkins, who was a tremendous actor, one of the best actors I've ever worked with. I cast Bill in every single thing I did because he plays the voyeur and hardware and cop and dust devil, etc. Because Bill was just fantastic, and he's a veteran of Star Wars, Batman, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and dozens of movies. And Bill was playing the Grizzly Bear Man, Kirill the Bear Man. Bill was there. They was held to contract the entire way through. Had to go through the prosthetic makeup to be the Grizzly Bear Man pretty much every day. And in for like 6 months, however long it took. And in the finished movie, at one point his shoulder is visible That's as far as it goes. He never gets his face into the frame.
There is actually
So-
one brief scene where you see his face. It's when they're going down into the sea, the Sayer of the Law, and he basically turns around and that's it. Yeah.
I mean, Bill literally
But
had
he's
to
in the
have,
opening title, single
psychiatric
cut
treatment
credit.
after that. I mean, that process of being made up in prosthetic makeup every day for like month after month after month after month, and never being shot on, never having script, never getting into frame was like some kind of purgatory.
And was that the main thing that was? I know in the documentary you touch on the egos between Brando and Kilmer coming out of trailers. Were there other production? Was The Rain a major production delay as well, or was it mostly?
I think it was mainly, yes. I mean, obviously the elements were an issue, but it was mainly the ever evolving production where they were just trying to get something that would get them to the finish line, and they did not care about the extras, and they had the money. They had to have everybody in makeup because they were the background people. They could tell them to sit there for hours and hours on end without them complaining because that's what they had to do. They just had to wait until Brando and you can tell in the movie that they've pretty much used every frame that they've got of Brando in front of camera. You know, he's just sitting there mumbling a lot of the time. Don't do that. You know, it's like, we've got some Brando, so basically that's going to be in the movie.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I think the fundamental mistake that New Line made really was to assume it was a Val Kilmer movie.
Yeah.
Which really is probably just because it was possibly 10, 20 years too soon, and that had the film been made now in a post Guardians of the Galaxy, post Dawn of the Planet of the Apes ecology,
right.
They might have realized that the Beast People were important,
right.
or actually what the film was about. The sheer fact that they did become the background people who are standing over there while we deal with Val was a big problem. It's a bit like if they'd imagined Dawn of the Planet of the Apes was a Gary Oldman movie.
Right.
And the whole thing became about Gary Oldman's character, and all the ape characters in the rest of the movie were relegated to the background, and then the entire pace was dictated because Val is playing a support part. He's playing Dr. Moreau's assistant. He's playing a very minor character.
And yet he wasn't cast as such,
the actual
right?
plot.
Yeah.
He wasn't cast as that. That was a choice he made, right?
Yeah, well, you had to have 40% fewer shooting days. Of course, that didn't work, so it ended up lasting 6 months.
But then he ended up, Richard can tell it, but
Well,
he
the
ended
problem
up...
is he's the kind of person Val is as an actor. Once he became the support part, he then needed to make his support part back into the main role. The support part then had to have the most screen time. The support part then had to be the one who was going to sleep with the girl. The support part then had to be the one who was going to read the dog man's poetry or be in the middle of the frame the entire time. So he then started trying to rearrange the plot of the movie to make his character back into the lead again after he'd become the support. So that's how all the other actors, everyone else from Tamara Morrison through Ron Perlman, ended up being shoved into the background, and everyone forgot what that the movie was actually supposed to be a monster movie and be about the beast folk.
Yeah, ultimately it's a film about you hire a visionary filmmaker who's showing you what the vision is, which is a really radical vision. Those illustrations really shocked me watching the documentary because I'm thinking what you were going to do is a version of that film we actually saw. But it's not even in the ballpark. Those images of yours, and then you remove the visionary.
That's Graham Humphreys who did all those designs. Who's worked with Richard since Hard Raid, did the original Evil Dead poster. I mean, the guy's an amazing artist, and fit the model of what Richard was trying to do. But it's pretty obvious that New Line didn't really care about that movie, and at the time it was a $5 to $8 million movie. So it's like run along and make your movie. But as soon as it becomes a Marlon Brando picture, they kind of sit up and take note to not be hemorrhaging money.
Was there was there an option to have said no at that point, like to what Brando, or you just had to? There's no way you could have kept it a small movie at that point.
Yeah.
No. The only option I had was at that point in time they wanted to replace me with Roman Polanski.
Okay, I remember.
Right. So I would have had the option of saying, okay, I quit, and then I would have had a screenwriting credit on the Brando Polanski movie that would have resulted. It would have been a better film because obviously Polanski would have had about a year to prepare for it,
right?
Which would have given him a better chance.
Yeah.
And that was really the only option that was presented to me. And at that point in time, I was incensed and decided to fight to try and stay on the project, which was obviously a mistake in that thereafterwards there was no real way of getting off it again.
Right. But see, there's no way to know that. You had to experience it. Yeah.
So did the studio specifically say, do whatever Brando, go along with whatever Brando says? Like when he says, I want an ice bucket on my head, was the studio very specific about saying, accommodate?
Just agree with him?
Yeah.
No, but I never got to.
You were gone by then.
I was gone by the time the big man turned up. I was essentially removed for saying no to a different request, which is something I would like to try and get into the documentary. Uh-huh. But the terminal argument with Val was, in fact, over a treehouse. We'd had a very bad day on the freighter at sea with the hurricane, and I'd been trying to get the animals off the freighter. We had a freighter full of live animals, and the puma was the hardest one to get off the boat. And so I'd had my Life of Pi thing with the goddamn puma on the freighter, which was also the end of my white suit. The puma pissed all over me. The puma was terrified.
Wow.
Getting in from that, Val had been back at the hotel for about 4 or 5 hours, and had time to shower, think about it, and confronted me. And as I was coming back into the hotel, and decided that he wanted us to build him a tree house, and that he also thought his character should be sleeping with the Firuza Balk character, not the other guy, this male lead thing that was getting in his way. I was in a bad mood, and I said something along the lines of, "No, we are not building you a treehouse."
Why did he want the treehouse? I'm more intrigued by the
He could request whatever he wanted. I mean, it was everything was a power game.
Build me a treehouse.
And in terms of Brando, I've subsequently talked to somebody who worked very closely with him. And they came along to one of the screenings, and they actually really liked the documentary because they thought it was very fair to Brando. And
well, yeah,
but basically they said he was like, these people, this is such a joke, this entire production. Watch how nobody will tell me no. Nobody would dare come up to me and tell me no. Today I'm going to put a bucket on my head and just watch. They'll just work around it. They weren't even going to ask.
I've always heard that story about him, that he would just purposely in the first couple of days of
shooting.
He'd change his performances.
The big one, the thing I wanted to ask about is because obviously the famous story on Superman is that, they paid him a ton of money to be in that movie, and he showed up and told Richard Donner, like, I just don't want to be here. Can we just have like a trash can and I'll just do the voice? And he's like, no, we paid you millions of dollars. Well, you're Jor-El. You have to do it. And because he said that, he was like, all right, fine. Yeah. But I love that I felt like he's the type of character that's like, what can I get away with?
And actors and directors often play that little game at the beginning of productions. But, Brando had gotten to that point where he's like, he's going to play it on a bigger level. Mm-hmm. And of course, you're not going to say no to Brando. I think that's one of the reasons that they got somebody like Frankenheimer in. It certainly wasn't because he was the right man to direct The Island of Dr. Moreau. It was because he's just one of those people who might be able to have an argument with Brando and not, shrivel and say, yes, Mr. Brando. But as you see, even he got completely overwhelmed by the egos. Yeah, he was older, but he was still, a strong drill sergeant of a man, you know.
I mean, did you get a sense of that when you met him at his house? Because before shooting, it all banked on a meeting with him. I mean, judging from the doc, it seemed like you guys got along very well. And
we got along very well, and Mr. Brando was always incredibly kind and polite to me, and extremely friendly throughout. And I never actually got to the point where I tried to direct him. The white thing was my fault. In that came out of Brando initially suggesting his character should wear black and just be a face hanging in the darkness. And I thought, no, that's Apocalypse Now. Mm-hmm. We've got to go the other way. And the white suit, I guess, comes from Charles Lawton originally and the Island of Lost Souls. Right. Mm-hmm. And there'd been considerable talk, and this part indicates that Brando did on some level read the script, because Dr. Moreau's whole approach is to basically, if the things that are wrong with our environment and our world are our fault and caused in the laboratory, then the correctives can be found there as well. And if we're going to have a problem like a nuclear war, then why don't we, instead of worrying about radiation, why shouldn't we just make ourselves radiation resistant? If there's holes in the ozone layer, rather than trying to fix the goddamn ozone layer, let's just fix the melanin skin pigment in our skin so that we screen out the harmful UV rays and don't get skin cancer. my dad died of skin cancer, so this skin cancer thing was floating around, and Moreau's habit of putting the white paint on himself again was probably relating to some discussion of melanin skin pigment in the script, which is long gone in the movie. There's no real
he didn't discuss that with anybody
visible
there
on screen. I don't think that it makes a heck of a lot of sense. I can see how that outfit and the look probably did evolve out of the conversations we're having.
Oh.
Yeah, I guess with Thulis not being in it yet, but the curious thing to me will be how he then fit in against Brando, like coming in so late. That must have been enormous pressure.
He quite famously didn't want to do the film and had a horrible time on the film. I mean, at the time he'd just come off Naked and wanted to be a serious actor and not do stupid movies. And he did this, and then he did some dragon movie, and that was pretty much the end of his Hollywood career. And he went back. But you're not going to get characters like Johnny from Naked through the rest of your career. No, and I think he's the one who went to Hollywood, and New Line actually distributed Naked, so it was Bob Shea who actually wanted David Thewlis in the league because he liked him in Naked so much.
He's dream casting for Val Kilmer's role. Like, he's perfect for that role. Like, I remember that's when I knew something. That's how I knew they were kind of reversed somehow. I guess the question is, like, one thing I didn't think the doc really was necessarily discussing too much because there's so much to get through was what was going through your mind when you're on set. What were you watching? Were you curious about what the director was doing? Were you was it an out-of-body experience to be seeing shards of your creations at work, or was it just, fuck this, I want to blow it all up? I can't even imagine.
Well, it was very much the matter of being trapped in a nightmare rather than being in a lucid dream. In a lucid dream, you're in control of the circumstances. In a bad dream, everything's just happening in the wrong order, but it's all kind of weirdly familiar, but just not happening in the way you're going to expect. And I mean, on some level, it was very reassuring. I mean, it was good to see how much worse the situation was than when I'd been in charge.
Right.
It was good to see that it had deteriorated to the point that it had become, because had I gone back on set and they'd fixed it and it was all working like clockwork, then I would have probably gotten so depressed I'd never have wanted to work again.
Yeah.
I mean, I was removed after essentially 3 days of shooting. However, there's something like 40 days of downtime from the rest of the shoot where no shooting was accomplished at all and no shots were taken. And I can see that I would never ever, under any circumstances, have survived 40 days of not shooting with the crew standing around on an overhead of about 100 to 150 grand a day.
That's crazy.
I mean, the fact that Frankenheimer survived all that, I guess, it just means they gave him a lot more slack.
But they, at that point, just needed a movie, right? Yeah. It stopped being about, let's make a good movie, let's just have a movie.
Yeah, it was totally out of paranoia, basically. If they must have thought, if anyone can do it, Frankenheimer can do it. And if it's not working with him, well, then it's not going to work with anybody. So they just kind of let it go on until they walked away with just enough footage to make a film.
So disheartening, yeah. But were there any moments that you could see anything that you enjoyed from being inside in terms of, say, maybe the creature stuff and stuff? Like, I just can imagine it feels like you're becoming part of your world in terms of the design, but not the narrative in a sense, Well,
it was all pretty nightmarish. I mean, I was pleased. The only thing that seems to have worked was the dehumanizing process. And the
guy came in.
They really had started to turn into animals. Unfortunately for me, the makeup effects aren't wholly successful because no one was supervising them. Yeah. I mean, beyond a certain point, all the different makeup artists were just running in their different directions. And as no one in charge of the film had any interest in the creatures or how they looked, I don't think there was any overall thought that went into really directing the makeup effects. So a lot of them were pretty damn weird looking and far from the mark in terms of what I would have.
And they shot in light a lot.
That was the thing. It was the same in the 1977 version. They were shot during the day, so it looks like people in elaborate Halloween costumes. Even as great as the makeups are, representing the designs and stuff, when you see them in that light, you can tell it's not real fur. And you can tell it's a person would you have shot them in a different way?
Originally, the DP was a guy called Dariusz Wolski who shot The Crow and just come off Crimson Tide and more recently shot Prometheus. But New Line fired him and replaced him with Billy Fraker, who
also an old school guy.
Shot it the way he shot it. Other notable casualties who were removed from the thing was Big New Poisoner, the composer from the Kieslowski movies, who had already started work on the score, which some of which was actually recorded. So we're in the process.
We're trying to get it. Yeah.
Of trying to unearth.
Is he still alive?
Wow.
Yeah.
No, I've just been in contact with his manager a few times this week. We would love to be able to try and put that on the disc release because his soundtracks are beautiful.
I was very impressed with Double Life of Veronique in particular, and Proisner had already started the score. That's the reason why there's a piano in the film. It was partially linked to the massive score that Proisner was going to contribute, which got thrown out the window along with the original camera work, along with the original screenplay, which was from Waylon Green, the Wild Bunch guy, and Michael Herr.
I love that note.
The Full Metal Jacket, Apocalypse Now guy. Again, it's people whose work you probably should not just throw out without kind of thinking about what one's doing for a moment. But
Did Frankenheimer find out that you were there while you were there or not?
No, he didn't.
Okay.
In real life. He was never introduced to me.
Did you just leave, or was that towards the end of production?
No, I stayed all the way through to the rap party. And by the time I came to the rap party, I put back I went back into my white suit again. The only time, no one ever introduced me to Frankenheimer. They'd fired the entire crew. So there was about, I think, just the second AD in common with the original crew.
Oh, wow.
And production designer.
Graham Grace Walker, the production designer.
But you weren't in trouble? Because I know there was this tension that, obviously to get paid out or anything, that you weren't meant to be around.
Yeah, had they caught me on the set, that might have been bad. They would then have had proof that I was infiltrating the production or that I was trying to sabotage the production. They would have tried to pin they could have blamed me for the overages and the fact that they hadn't shot all those days. Or I would have been scapegoated for the problems on the new production.
Right.
So it would have been bad to get caught. But in reality, the only time that Frankenheimer addressed me was I was standing talking with Palooza and Ron Perlman, and Frankenheimer came over and said, "Get back! These people need some space." That was about it.
That sounds about right. Did you meet Val on that? No,
Val never knew I was back on set.
Oh, cool.
Brando did, but Val never knew I was back on set.
He might now. Somebody's got to send him.
I don't think he's seen it.
Literally, in terms of direction, the only other direction I ever got as a Beast person from anyone on the from Frankenheimer's first AD or anyone else is that when going around the bonfire, some of us were told to go left and the others were told to go right.
Oh, that
was as deep as the direction I ever got.
Right.
Well, I love that bit where doesn't somebody hand you a torch or something like that?
That all happened. But there was certainly no attempt by the director or anyone else to actually engage with us or talk to us or basically tell us what to do.
Now, with your reputation, I mean, I don't, it's funny. You never want to be ahead of your time, obviously, in life. And you clearly are, because I think the kind of visions you have are something that now are kind of what most horror fans desire. When we see a movie like Spring comes out, it's a romance, but there happens to be a monster in it. And they just think movies aren't as A to B as they were during that period. But unfortunately for you, that's when you're trying to get it made. And also I noticed, like, Mike DeLuca never... Did you try to talk to him?
Yeah, and it was getting to the 11th hour and I hadn't got an answer from him, and I was starting to panic a bit because I needed somebody from New Line. And it was quite late in the game when I got Ed Pressman as well. So from people actually from production, it was really lacking that side. So was in danger of becoming sort of gossip from,
and yet he was trying to put these interesting people together. I mean, it seems like his intentions were interesting,
Yes, but I've subsequently, so eventually I got a no from him, and that's when I went to Bob Shea, and thankfully he immediately turned around and said yes. I think he regretted saying yes because he was definitely not in a good mood when we got there to do the interview. But
Bob's never in a good mood.
Well, that was the only time I've ever met him, but he certainly gave us. It was a short interview, but it was an interview which gave us the essential stuff about what it was like from the New Line brass, and that was essential. And essentially, he did not particularly want to make the movie, and he outright says that.
Well, this seems to be the problem. Too many people didn't want to make the movie, and the person who wanted to make it wasn't there anymore.
Yeah.
But what I was trying to ask was actually about your reputation, because at that point in Hollywood, obviously you're being, your name's probably, especially because they're shooting in Australia, so they're only going to get rumors back to Hollywood. What did you know about where you stood in the possibility of even returning to try to make another film, or did you just know that it wasn't even worth coming back at that point?
It was pretty much pointless. No, it was quite clear that, It was pretty bizarre. I mean, in the documentary, the line producer, Tim Zinnemann, mentions how when they decided to remove me from the production, he says that we didn't do it in a manly way. We called his agent to call him. In reality, my agent never called me. My CIA responded by simply never calling me again.
Oh, wow.
And no one in charge ever recepted any of my calls again. Or I only knew it was happening because of a deep, dead silence. That no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't reach any of them on the phone, which started from about day 2. And I eventually did see my agent again. About 4 years later, I ran into her in a foyer in London as she was coming out of a lift. And I said, "Hey, Beth." Her name's Beth Swafford, by the way. Beth responded by completely blanking me and looking like she wanted to call security.
Wow.
But, there was certainly no prospect there of negotiation or trying to,
That's the thing the film does, though. I feel like the film's incredibly balanced, though, because it's not just everything he would have done would have made this the perfect movie. It feels like a very balanced film, but for me, it really restores. I know it's a lot late, but it really feels like it restores your reputation as somebody who was, would have worked hard and, is passionate about these ideas. And I think that's really interesting in a town like this, because here it's called the industry, and where I don't know where you're from, but where I'm from, it's still really an art. Occasionally films cross over and become entertainment, but really they're funded by governments, and.
But essentially, that's why it's called the doomed journey. I mean, basically, just right when it got on board, essentially there was that point where Brando. Yeah. They reached out to Brando. It was doomed from that point on, and it was just the journey of trying to stay alive. It was the exciting part of the journey, but you knew it was going to end bad.
How long did it take you to get the desire to want to create in the film world again?
Well, I guess these ideas have been floating around my head for a long time, but it really took this documentary and David to get me down from the mountain.
For Theatre Bazaar?
Well, even Theatre Bazaar didn't get me down from the mountain.
It was more of a dipping your toe in the water again.
It's shot up there, yeah. But Theatre Bazaar did bring David up the mountain, and he brought the camera and
the frogs. The frogs are already there.
The toads are already there. That's for sure. Yeah, they're all collected off the local roads. So that's how we did it.
I told them before you came in. Sorry, Rob, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, it's an amazing thing. I know you've been in town for several weeks now and meeting with people. It's got to be amazing to hear how much a lot of people appreciate your work. I mean, in retrospect now that I'm sure you've met with a lot of people that have said, "Oh yeah, I mean, I love hardware, I love this," and the documentary. I guess following up on what Elric said, I mean, what's it been like to be back in Los Angeles, kind of promoting this thing and talking to filmmakers?
Yeah, very intriguing. I mean, I'm grateful that so many people are aware of the work, considering in what terrible shape it's in. I mean, almost everything I've done has been destroyed or cut to pieces. I mean, even hardware, which is in the best shape, got an X rating and got cut for an X, and then Miramax removed 2 sequences from it for the American release. Dust Devil's a total mess in America. I mean, it's like more than 40 minutes cut out of it. It's got the wrong aspect ratio, the wrong grade. And so,
oh, wow. I never knew that.
No,
the subversive version was what you wanted there, wasn't
the subversive DVD version is what's labelled the final cut is the same as the European version in good shape, but otherwise every other Miramax version is an absolute mess. And then you've got the Island of Dr. Moreau. So much of my work, by the time it's gotten this far west, has arrived in kind of a fractured form, and then none of the documentaries I think are available at all. So it's
I can say in our group of friends, and I know this doesn't mean anything to anyone outside of it, but we do a lot of things. Whether it's Hard Trivia, or a lot of people run a lot of the theaters around here. I've never heard so many people talking about someone in such a positive and excited way as I've heard in the last few weeks. So because you've been so obviously willing to just hang out and talk to people, I just keep hearing people, I was talking to Richard Stanley, or I heard him talking the screening and blah, blah. And it's really fantastic. It seems to be an energy that, channeled right, could lead to great things, I think. But
that's the plan.
Yeah, that's why you're here. It's just a promotion.
In the 20 years you've been away, has Hollywood changed any, or is it still just the same Hollywood?
Well, the fabric of the city hasn't altered. The whatever crazy ley lines drive the place are all still throbbing away. The buildings and the actual place, give or take the tides of technology and fashion, which have altered what washes through the windows and clubs, but the actual buildings are the same. But the people are completely, utterly changed.
Really?
Yeah, I mean,
How so?
I find that that most of the rebels, the sort of outsider artists, the ex-flatmates, former lovers, etc., have all like now metamorphosed into like showrunners and studio heads that become so scary I can scarcely call them on the telephone. Whereas half the people who are running the show in the old days now seem broken and prematurely aged and kind of like have mobility issues.
20 years.
It looks like something. But yeah, in 20 years they shouldn't
Hollywood.
age that much. I mean, so many of the ones from the past seem to be have mobility issues, white hair, etc. I think, damn, it's like they've been juiced.
Well, they had to survive the early 2000s.
So what I was going to say before, I told them before the show, I was so intrigued by your mountain. When you talk about it in the film, I wanted to know a little bit about the history about it, because it seemed like such a cool place, so much so that like you didn't want to leave.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I belong in that spot. The mountain, Montsegur. In brief, there was some kind of temple there for thousands of years. In 1244, there was a famous confrontation between the pagans and the Christian crusaders. The crusaders didn't want to go there for a very long time, so it became the last redoubt of the local pagan population. Heretical Christians and the Jewish population fleeing from the crusader armies fled there because they thought they would be safe. Then in the early 13th century, the Lord of Montsegur had enough with the Crusaders and ordered the extermination of all of the inquisitors in the south of France and asked for the severed head of the leader of the Inquisition to be brought to the castle so he could make it into a ceremonial cup. It was this act of killing the inquisitors and severing the head of the lead inquisitor that caused the Pope to say, you guys have got to do something about that and go and destroy the synagogue of Satan, cut off the serpent's head. And they dispatched a crusader army of 10,000 people to knock over Montsegur. A hard corps of 250 fighting men under Pierre-Roger de Mirepoix fought a 10-month defensive action against the 10,000 incoming crusaders. They lost. The Holy Roman Church then burned 260 of them at the stake in order to make an example so that people wouldn't try and stand against Christianity in future. But because it was kind of a spot where two warring deities basically faced off against each other, the deity that the people of the book, the basically Jews, Muslims, and Christians worship, and the other god basically tangled at Montsegur, makes it an interesting spot.
And all that happened in like your front yard. That's crazy.
Are you going to get him a history show? I want a history show. He's already narrating history.
He's done a documentary about Montsegur, not necessarily the history of Montsegur, but it's kind of like an unofficial follow-up, even though it came out before Lost Soul. But it goes into what's going on in Montsegur, and it is a very interesting, curious, strange part of the world.
Well, it was the weirdest place I've ever been to. So after going there a few times, nothing else could compete. So I became a full-time resident.
How long have you been away?
Sorry. I was just going to say, do you find like cool shit on your property and things like that?
And there's an awful lot of stuff that I just never heard of before because of thanks to the Inquisition and the way things were run, they tried to obliterate any historic record of anything else that had happened. So starting to discover that there were other histories and that so much of the sort of, the goth and magical culture that floats around today hadn't a point of origin. Like, for instance, the first pack of tarot cards comes from the Marseille deck comes from down south. All the main books of the Kabbalah were written in that region in the early 13th century and stuff. And a lot of, magical and esoteric culture kind of radiates out from it. But all the history of what actually happened, who created that stuff and what that culture was like was obliterated by 700 years of extreme censorship and the sheer fact that they would kill you or burn you if you mentioned it for a very long time. But now in the 21st century, they can't do that anymore when we have the internet. So there is the ability to gradually translate stuff and put the story straight.
Do you have good reception there for the internet?
I had to do that, yeah.
No, you had to get it installed.
Okay, you're on Wi-Fi.
It sounds somewhere isolated.
My own Wi-Fi, it's a satellite dish. It means in winter you have to boil water and pour it on the dish to stop it from icing up.
Oh, wow.
Wow, that is you really have you have internet if you're boiling water and like dumping.
Well, sometimes you can't get a hold of him because it gets it's just like The Shining. He is definitely totally isolated.
Wow.
January, February, March, you get snowed in. I mean, Montsegur was utterly cut off from the outside world until the 1960s when they built the first tar road in. by which stage everyone in the valley was related to each other. And the population has been falling ever since because now they've got a way of escaping and getting out into the outside world. But
how long have you been out? Has it been like 6 weeks or a couple months that you've been gone?
It's been a few months now, 2 months, and starting to get a little less frightened of the traffic. I mean, and, getting used to the bewildering variety of choice in the outside world.
Yeah. Does it change your perspective going back, like seeing kind of this, not the modern world, because you're still in the modern world, but just seeing how things are in the place you were once? Going back, does it make you miss anything about it, or are you quite content to return?
Well, I have to. I have to fight my barbarian instinct to simply grab whatever loot I can and whack a lady over the head
Take her back.
And ride back to the mountains with it.
Well, Bekah, by pure numbers,
Hey guys,
that's starting to look good in your favor.
do you get Amazon at least? Like, can I order Amazon to your door?
She comes with child, though. So
I do have one of those.
I did have one question that was really burning in my head when I was watching this, which was for either of you. But is there an example of a great? I could have researched it, far too lazy. Is there a great film that was ever made having been taken over by a different director once shooting had begun? Because I know there's lots of examples of a director's died, but is there a single successful film where a director took over beyond just being passable? And I couldn't think of one off the top of my head, but because it's happened a lot.
Yeah, I can't think of one off the top of my head. I mean, there's got to be examples.
Yeah, otherwise the studios wouldn't do it.
Like if it was early in pre-production, that's different. But if you've started shooting, even if it's 3 days, you have to figure, okay, you're coming in just to save something.
Yeah, exactly, because there's no prep time.
Yeah, Monty Hellman told me about one where I think it was the last film by who's the Robert Shaw. The one Robert Shaw died, his last film, and the director also died during production, and there was still a couple. It's called Avalanche or Avalanche Express. It wasn't. I can't remember which one it was. Not a very good film, but it had one big set piece, big explosion. And they're all in different languages. But just like having to be brought on to kind of finish something. And he said he did 2 films like that, uncredited, I think. Where you had to finish maybe like 12 days of shooting, from something, and forgettable films, but somebody had to finish them.
An example: The Rage, Carrie 2, Cachet for the win.
What is? Did they really? Somebody else took over that?
Yeah, Cachet, the director, she took it over after I guess a couple of days or whatever.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay. But I don't know if I'd say
Cachet.
the fact that I've never seen it.
But even Frankenheimer said that he had done it a couple of times and basically saved the movie. But I think it was still in the context. I don't even know what the movies were, but it was still in the context as I saved it, as in I delivered a movie, good enough to release. And I think that was another reason why it was hired.
Yeah, it just seems like, and to know so early, it's different if it was halfway through and the person wasn't showing up, if you just weren't showing up to work, I understand, but 3 days in, you have to think that you might be backing the wrong horse if by changing, It's just you're taking the person who knows the material most out of it. Anyway, I mean, that's what your film's saying anyway. Yeah. I mean, this is definitely an episode. When we preface this at the start, we'll definitely say, see it first.
Yeah, we've done that a couple of times. See it first.
Because it definitely, I don't know. And now, is it a story that's finished, or do you feel like, your partnership with Richard, that this is a story, and that particular part of the story is over, but it feels like the story, I feel like the chapter of you guys coming back to LA and showing this and the reputation, because a lot of people probably who didn't know Richard that well back then would have just gone, oh, that maniac. It's like how stories about Herzog used to get back that weren't ever true. Herzog would always be the first to say, I'm the first person looking at safety. I'm the first, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know how true that is either, but that's what he says,
That's probably is true, because I don't think Herzog's ever lost anyone.
Yeah. Well, except Fitzgerald is something, but that was a huge production.
Yeah, no, very much so.
Died in the light plane accident on the way to the location, that one, but not on the actual shoot.
Yeah, no, it could be.
But it's certainly, set up a situation where we've, been talking to other people about Richard's next movie and that kind of thing. So it certainly opened some doors and some dialogues, and hopefully that's going to blossom into something
real.
real.
Dust Devil, correct? I saw that on
We are.
Yes.
It's not going to. It's not going to be anytime soon, but it's we've still got to shoot the extras and do all that. I'm sure it'll be quite an undertaking. But yeah, that's in the plans.
You mean you didn't shoot it while he was here?
He brought his Dust Devil jacket with him, so we're going to go.
Awesome.
We're going to go to Palm Springs
I was
into
so
the desert.
impressed by how much you still have, because you still have all the original drawings, you still have some of the masks, and you still have the freaking Dust Devil jacket. that is awesome.
Yeah, and the Mark 13 head is sitting on the shelf in the kitchen. I always try and keep it close to the electronic appliances in the hope that it might somehow draw the energy off the rest of them and reassemble itself. So
I'm now picturing you literally carrying these things up a mountain. I don't know. Do you get movers?
It's horrible, yeah. I mean, I've lost so much good stuff over the years too, but at least now one good thing about Monstergore is it's kind of safe up there.
Yeah.
I mean, trying to hold on to that stuff in the city is much harder, but the mountain's more easily defensible.
You're got a Carrie.
Without asking what the next movie you're working on is, can you tell us like what type of movie, having been through all of this?
There's a certain amount that... go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, what type of movie are you interested in doing? Like, is it a genre flick? Is it falling into a particular subgenre?
That's the answer. I like, of course.
Of course. That's what we like to hear. If you're like,
no shame there.
Forget horror. I'm going to go make a rom-com. I would have been a little shocked, honestly.
Yeah.
No, what needs to happen now is a sci-fi horror movie, and it needs to be
I think so.
Something which is I've never really made a scary movie. I've thought, and that neither Hardware nor Dust Devil are honestly horror movies. Mm-hmm. So I thought the time has come to try and scare people in the 21st century. I enjoy scaring people and haven't done it for a long time. So what we're working on is an adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's The Color Out of Space.
Oh, terrific.
The reason for this is because it seems to me that all of Lovecraft's work is about trying to evoke a mood of cosmic horror or terror and a sense of man's pitiably small position in the cosmos. And I've never seen that in a single H.P. Lovecraft movie. All the movies are always played for laughs or like camp fun. And I thought if someone has to take the Lovecraft mythos and make it terrifying again.
I've talked about that.
And play it straight. Yeah. And there's a definite hole in the mythos is a bit like a psychoactive virus, and it's spread all across the world. I have children in the Pyrenees that come to my house and look around and go, oh, Cthulhu, and they can name the different Lovecraft deities, even though they don't speak English and they haven't been outside of the Pyrenees. But the stuff has permeated through to Russia, to Asia. People know about Lovecraft's work all over the world, but for whatever reason, there's no great movies.
I've talked about that on the show before when we did a Lovecraft episode about how all of Lovecraft's work seemed to transcend reality in a way, and it enters into this other plane of being, which very few people have been able to capture on screen. And Stuart Gordon does it, but the ones that he does well are the ones that have the least kind of otherworldly, other reality quality, like Reanimator.
Or Dagon's all underwater.
Yeah, Dagon. But as soon as he gets into one where it does kind of transcend, like Dreams of a Witch House, where you've got a witch time traveling through architecture, things get a little wonky and silly. It's really hard to do well. So
but it's internal. And it's about madness a lot of the time. And those are things that maybe are harder, but still not impossible to do cinematically.
Well, the people we're talking to are big Lovecraft fans, and when they read The Color Out of Space, they said this is the script that gets it right.
Oh, so you have a script already?
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just the
and I've been working on it for a few years up there. Okay. It was initially set in France, and it's now, thankfully, I've been able to move it back to New England again, which is a pleasure. And we're now back west of Arkham again, which I'm very pleased by.
Well, I'm excited to see what you do with this. It's a great story. So
I had a weird memory, and this probably is totally false, but I remember reading Fangoria in maybe as early 90s. I don't know if it was before Moreau or after. But were you meant to direct a Bruce Campbell, a film on an island set in a nuclear?
Yeah.
Oh my God! I read a blurb.
You should see the amount of projects he's been involved with. This is new to me.
I was reading Fangoria. I'm not kidding. Like 20 years ago in New Zealand, and I'd seen Hardware, and I'm reading this, and I was a big Bruce Campbell fan, at that age.
Yeah.
And I read Bruce Campbell, and I can't remember the actress, are set to star in Richard Stanley's first film in a while, blah blah blah, and it's set on an island in the post-apocalypse or something like that. And I remember being so excited about it, and you never made it.
Yeah, it's very annoying. The backers were too scared of that one.
Okay. What was it? What was the story?
The title was Vacation. It was meant to be a romantic black comedy about the end of the world.
Yeah.
It is a comedy. I love the script. It still stands up very well. The basic notion was a New York money man takes his lap dancer girlfriend on holiday to a Mediterranean resort island, sort of partially based on Ibiza or Kirkuk off Tunisia. And while they're there, an unspecified cataclysm destroys America. Not only they can't go home, but their credit cards no longer work. The computer no longer works. The outside world is destroyed. The lead character is a former investment banker. His whole reason d'etre is destroyed. She's a lap dancer. Her reason d'etre is kind of destroyed as well. As there's no money anymore, there's no point doing those things. At the same time as they're in a year zero North African potentially Muslim setting, they also happen to be symbolic of everything that's wrong with the world from the point of view of the locals. He's an East Coast Jewish money man. She's an American lap dancer. They are symbolic of everything that the locals hate and despise, which they hold responsible for their downfall. And in some way, the leads are responsible, even though the end of the world's not really their fault. But of course, in the course of it, that means that they eventually managed to actually fall in love. So
who was the actress who would have been in that same article?
We went through a bunch, so I won't speculate. We didn't actually end up casting any final person, and it kind of died the death. First of all, when Bruce got the job on Burn Notice and got something indescribably better paid. And also when the backers started looking through the script and thinking, is this a good idea to do a low-budget comedy, which was essentially my take on 9/11, really. It was about what happens when you have your financial penis cut off and how do you essentially regain confidence in oneself. And they take a big hit at the first act, and the two indomitable leads, Carly and Bryce, work their way back up to a position of power.
So that wasn't the only one. From what David was saying, you had a few other features you had tried to develop at post Moreau.
Yeah, including the Spice Girls movie. When we were at the Cine Family, we were at the Cine Family. There was a poster for Lost Soul, and right next to it was Spice World. And I took a photo, thinking the juxtaposition was funny. And it turns out that Richard didn't get very far. But at one point, you were talking to somebody about possibly directing that movie.
Oh, well, that was their problem. It was at one point. It was in fact one of the producers, Uri Fruchtman, who at one point suggested it. But it wasn't ever a good idea.
It wasn't one of the ones he developed. Let's put it that way.
I would have loved the Spice Girls movie. Then.
You would have done something with that.
I wanted it. If it was that dark, that would have been phenomenal.
Yeah, it could have been worse. Whatever they did with it, But what is the problem when you're trying to get there? Obviously, I think now, after this film and also meeting people you can trust, obviously insulating yourself with producers you can trust is a huge part for a creator. But what was the problem getting these? Was it always just financial, trying to get movies off the ground at that point, or?
Yeah, and there's always a bunch of people out there who are going to do hey, isn't he that guy who didn't give Val Kilmer the treehouse? Which still happens. Comes up.
Came up just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, at a certain level of the industry. 20 years later, it's still difficult for folk to get over that one.
But I think the film will set that right. So
yeah, but I was in today's day and age, people behaving like that, being an asshole, doesn't that kind of come out a little bit?
Yeah,
more?
but at that point, he was Val Kilmer,
but not
and he
now.
was Richard Stanley.
Yeah. I mean, I was telling. I don't care telling this story because I'm not a nobody anyway. So I was telling Elric right before we started that somebody I know, because Kilmer started doing horror conventions in the last couple of years or whatever.
He did.
So he flew out to Chiller, which is one that they do in New Jersey, and I can't remember who told me this. I think it was a friend of the driver, but it's this tough older New Jersey guy. They ask him oh, can you go pick him up from the airport and bring him to the hotel or whatever for the convention? And he does. And he doesn't know who Val is. He doesn't give a shit. He's just got asked to drive him. And he's in the car and he's just like, hey, how you doing? How was your flight? And he's like, hey man, I'm a star. You don't talk to me. And he's kind of well, fuck you, man.
That makes sense at one point.
No, apparently he's still like that.
That surprised me. He looked like he would have gone humble.
I got to have but I approached him every which way possible because I would have thought the same thing. I would have thought he might actually look back on this now because unanimously people were telling these stories that he was a difficult man at that time on that shoot. So you might have thought that he might have taken stock all these years later, but I never got to ask him because he didn't respond.
Wow.
It's interesting. He obviously didn't care about, at a certain point, being number one, because I remember when The Saint happened a few years later. That was around when he just didn't give a shit. It seemed
It's
like
around the same time, wasn't it?
Yeah,
That was the very next movie.
Yeah, very next movie.
because the one before was Heat, which is actually one of his best performances. I think Heat is right before.
No, the
Moreau.
Batman.
I think it's Batman and Heat same
was
year.
it?
Yeah, I actually met Val on the set on Heat.
Oh, you
That's
did?
right before, yeah.
No,
Yeah,
it's just interesting. It seems to be. I mean, who knows?
I really
It's always
liked
speculation.
Salt and Sea was like right when his
The little
decline
after,
started, but I always liked that
look,
one.
and I love him in Kiss Kiss Bang
Yeah, no, it's
Bang.
an actor.
Oh, yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I want to hang out with him.
Yeah, that's
But apparently he was difficult even on Top Secret. I read it, and that was his first movie.
Okay,
So
interesting.
even back then, he obviously just has a difficult personality.
Yeah.
And
Apparently,
so was Brando, right? On every film, and
Yeah,
it seems
that's
like a lot of actors. I've often heard from certain people that the more talented, naturally talented an actor is, the less they actually work for anything, and the less if it just comes, they don't feel the need. The actors who have to work every day.
But what was your analogy about the fact that was actually New Line's fault in some way, the way they kind of treated him?
I do feel that New Line have to bear some responsibility, because the main problem was simply that they were going to say yes to anything Val asked for.
Right.
And when you're in a situation where people will say yes to anything you want, things can get a little bit out of control. And that, I guess, that I remember Val explaining to me that when a lamp you picked up the lamp off the table and a lamp's not working properly, you don't fix the lamp, you get a new one, throw it down. And the fact that New Line were always prepared to bring him anything he asked for, I guess encouraged him to do that. I mean, under any sane and normal circumstances, Val couldn't have just gone across the restaurant and sat down at the table with Tim Zinnemann and said, get rid of the director. But after having the treehouse discussion, they'd have said yes.
Did you have any good conversations with him early on about the film and gauge any
like
excitement?
casting?
Oh
Was
yeah, he
casting good?
was absolutely wonderful and extremely nice to me, up to the point that he signed the contract, which was weird. And everyone liked him. I mean, my mother liked him. She was a fan of Willow. Who isn't? So my mother was saying, cast him.
Shocking New
cast him.
Zealand.
And, so he was very, very sweet to me up until the contract was signed. I remember one of the last conversations we had before that, we were chatting and some kind of weird possum thing came up to us and sat down, and this little blinking animal was sitting there. And I thought, okay, this all seems all right. But the moment the contract was signed, he became unreachable, and suddenly started acting like he didn't want to be in the movie, which was extremely strange. I mean, up to that point, he really wanted to be in the movie. Then when he had the movie, I don't know, maybe it's the same deal with sleeping with someone and immediately after sex deciding you never want to see them again.
You're good at the chase, not the commitment.
Yeah, very, very odd. But up to that point, he was okay. Then he was an absolute monster to everyone from that point onwards. I mean, he was treating, obviously, Bob Shea the exact same way. Saying, I don't want to do this movie, don't speak to me, etc., etc.
I haven't got time for this conversation.
Well,
but
we're
they are
going to throw it
do
out there because we know Val's a listener. And we are willing to talk to you. We want to set the record straight.
Indeed, so are we. We would. There's still time.
Actually,
got about another week.
David first.
Yeah, about another week to get incorporated into the Blu-ray.
There's still time, brother.
Yeah, there's always time.
And really briefly, you popped up in Jodorowsky's Dune, which is another wonderful documentary about the making of a film that never came to fruition. How did that happen? How did they ask you to be in that one?
I guess that was because of Dr. Moreau. They figured that I'd probably have some perspective
You're the
on the
expert
situation.
on Doom.
Yeah, well, it's more, I guess, Dune fits into the same mold as Moreau, in that they both suffered from ultimately the same problem, which is that you can't make fantasy films for adults beyond a certain budgetary level. I mean, the moment the budget gets to a certain point, it has to be for 13-year-olds.
And then they're worried about the artists at filming the ships.
That's a sort of like an electric fence that all big, well-designed, kind of thoughtful projects fly into at a certain level, which is that the moment you have to have beast people or arrakis or sandworms, you require a budget, which is such that the thing has to be for 12-year-olds. It's just the ecology we're in. I don't think it's possible now, still to make an adult fantasy movie. And there's any number of great books, ideas, and projects which are trapped in that mess, where we probably will not in our lifetime have the opportunity to see those kind of movies until the ecology changes. I don't doubt that maybe somebody could make Jodorowsky's Dune in 100 years from now. Things might shift around, just like in 100 years from now we might see better Philip K. Dick movies, or a film version of Walter M. Miller's Canticle for Leibowitz or something. But right now it's really, really hard to imagine getting a sci-fi film, even with adult intellectual content, let alone adult themes, sex, violence, etc. Out there. If it's over now really over about $2 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real shame. We also want to mention Severin, and because we were always planning on having you on alone,
and we need to have you on.
Yeah,
Severin.
I'll come back to talk about that.
My interest in Intervision. I'm always talking about things.
And I'm a diehard Video Nasty Grindhouse fan in general, so I need to have you back on for that.
Yeah.
But what was the impetus for you to start it in the first place? And was it in the UK or here where you first kind of...
I started a label called Blue Underground in the UK originally, and then came over here because I made a documentary on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and was hired by Bill Lustig to basically do the extras for Anchor Bay just at the dawn of DVD. So I made that documentary at a very fortuitous time because they needed people to make documentaries about movies that were made 20, 30 years ago. And so...
One of them being my favorite of all time, which one? Can you guess?
I know.
The Joe Spinell story.
Everyone knows, because I talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the most beautiful
Well,
Well, that's the
portraits
one
of
that
an
most
actor, you know.
people,
It's a beautiful
that
film.
one or The Godfathers of Mondo are the ones that seem to have resonated. But yeah, I did lots and lots of them. And then Bill formed Blue Underground US, and I was first 6 years with Bill, and then formed Severin after that.
After amicably walking your own way.
It was pretty amicable.
And now how do you start? Do you just need to, knowing that you're going to break away, how do you get those first titles? Like
We got actually Gwendolyn being our first title was one that I'd been trying to get Bill to get for years, but he just thought it was a shit movie. And so I'm like, I think there's an audience for this film. I really think there's an audience for this film. It's Tawny Kitane, directed by Zhu Shekan, who did Emmanuel and The Story of O. But it was a huge budget French movie with all this awesome S&M production design and costume design. But it's kind of a wacky comedy Indiana Jones ripoff, but with naked breasts.
I own it. You may borrow.
Sold.
Yes, it's a very strange movie to have been one of the most expensive French productions of all time at the time. And anyway, we picked that up as soon as we told our distributor, same distributor that Blue Underground and several other labels had, that I had the rights to that. Carl Daft and me and John Cregan, who worked with me at Blue Underground US. They got very excited and said, this is going to be big. And so that was sort of the springboard. And then John, he grew up here, whereas Carl and I grew up in the UK. He was big. He was kind of the expert on movies that he'd watched in his teens on Skinamax. And Felicity was one that had fallen into,
Felicity.
and he was like, we've got to get Felicity. And I tracked down the Australian director of Felicity.
I own that
sure
one as
enough,
well.
got the rights to Felicity, and both of them did very, very well.
She's the
So it was
sauciest of us by far.
I am. Well, I'm also.
and
I'm
they're both great in their
Yeah.
own way, and I think and they both did very, very well. Then we did our first Jess Franco movies, and then we were just kind of off and running.
How'd you get
from
Santa
there.
Sangre there? Because I mean, that's one of my favorite movies in general.
Well,
but-
Santa Sangre is one that I had and I'm sure a lot of other people did, had my eye on for years and years and years, but it was caught up in some kind of rights issue that the Samuel Goldwyn Company technically owned it, but they didn't have the paperwork sufficient paperwork that they were confident to put it out on DVD. So all of us were kind of like vultures waiting for those rights to expire. But Anchor Bay's box set came out with all the other Jodorowsky movies. They gave up on it. So at that point, nobody was circling the title. And when it came available, we said we want it no matter what it costs. And that's one of the ones that that I put an enormous amount of heart into to try and make it an ultimate edition, which I do that. Well, we do that I do special editions of most of our releases, but some of them we really go the extra mile.
I think that's when I first met you, or at least got in touch with you, because I was trying to get Simon Boswell for a show when he was in town.
That's right.
Way back. And he was an amazing person too.
Yes. Obviously he scored Richard's films and
Theatre Bazaar, right?
And Theatre Bazaar. He did 2 segments of Theatre Bazaar.
And I'm still upset that sequel to Theatre Bazaar didn't happen, because the people you had lined, the French.
There was actually several possibilities for follow-ups, and then of course we got into this horrible situation with a thieving distributor who never paid us, and then it became suing time, and then ABCs of Death and VHS 1, 2, and 3 came out, and then by the time that we got the rights back, it was. We'd kind of missed the boat, really. Of
anthology.
Yeah.
I still think the idea you were doing for the French version, though, would have really stood on its own.
Yeah.
And we were ready to go. I mean, scripts had been written. They'd all signed they'd all signed on board, and it was ready to go. And the investors, same investors as the first Theatre Bazaar, they were ready to do it. But as soon as they realised that the distributor that we sold the film to were not actually going to pay what they were contractually obliged to pay us, they were like, we're not putting any money into this until we see money from the first one that we've been promised. And from then on, it was just really, really got ugly.
I always tell people to see the film Innocence, and you had the director of that as one of them. I was excited about that. Lucille
I don't know how to say her last name, but she also was, she did some dialogue for Enter the Void as well.
She's an editor on his stuff. But just a really magical little film if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, she's very interesting.
Severin distributes one of my top 5 movies of all time, Psychomania.
I love Psychomania. Yes, and that's one of those ones which has been out on so many public domain labels and always looked like shit. And that and Horror Express and Nightmare Castle and stuff like that. And we just kind of took, when we had access to decent elements, it's like let's roll the dice, because these movies are so good and they've never been seen how they're supposed to look. And of course, particularly in the case of Psychomania, which is just so whacked out, I wanted to get all the actors, I wanted to get the musicians, because the music in the film is amazing. The actors were particularly funny because they're like, I'm a Shakespearean actor. Why do you want to talk about that piece of shit that I did 40 years ago? But they find it amusing. I mean, they did it in good. They're just flabbergasted that this is the thing that people want to talk to them about. It's a great film.
I've written so many horror trivia questions about Psychomania, and there are so few people. I wrote a limerick about it last month because I opened with buried atop his bike.
Brilliant.
And I'll have to send you the limerick. But I have a poster of it in my living room. I have a T-shirt I wear all the time, and I always throw it out whenever people, because we get this question a lot, like, if you could remake one film, what would it be? I'm always like, I love the original Psychomania. But it is one that I find that if you're gonna remake anything, if something is dated, which Psychomania is, and it's beautiful for being part of its era, but you could definitely update it. But it's incredibly it's very much like of its time.
Yes,
so.
and that's a personal favorite. I mean, a lot of the films we put out are favorites of ours, and of course, having lived through the video nasty era, those dark days where there's a lot of video nasties and video nasty collections and stuff like that, and then a ton of coming up, we've got Vampiros Lesbos and She Killed in Ecstasy, which I've put like an enormous amount of love into, because there were a couple of the last interviews I did with Jess Franco, and we've got elements that have never been available before, so they look amazing.
Yeah, I have She Killed in Ecstasy important. It's not very. I mean, it's kind of grainy. And
this is beautiful. So and tons of extras and all that business. So that Axe and Kidnap Co-ed were 2 more that we've put a lot of.
And you have Intervision, which is your side label.
That's the sub label,
which was initially a lot of SOV stuff, right?
Initially it was. What did we release first? It was a couple of Jess Franco films we released first, because we didn't have decent elements, and we knew that people would be expecting a certain quality from Severin, but if you don't have the elements. What can you do? So we put them on Intervision first, but then we started to get the shot on video stuff, the Burning Moons, the Sledgehammer things, and actually people really, including yourself, Elric, really responded to these.
I saw Sledgehammer in a theater, and I was like, it didn't, like people were liking it. I liked it, but some don't connect to you. And then I watched things at home by myself, thinking it's going to be terrible, and I just thought it was the funniest. It worked.
And you'd be amazed, because we tried to do quite a lot of conventions. You'd be amazed the amount of people who come up and point to things or sledgehammers like, oh, that's the one on the table, and it's like, you're very interesting.
Now, some of them, like, if I watch them now, I'm like, man, this is a little rough around the edges. But when I was a kid watching Burning Moon, it fucking kicked ass.
Yeah, well, and but also that last 30 minutes that's what I tell everybody who, they're like, what's the most violent thing on the table? I'm like, well, the last half an hour of the Burning Moon, for sure. But be prepared to have your brain melted, It's Olaf Ittenbach.
Yeah, right.
But for some reason, that one of all of his movies was just such an angry young German making that movie.
Have you seen Angst?
I haven't, but somebody's working on that. I forgot who it was.
Cult Pix, I think.
Cult Epics, maybe?
I don't
Mondo
know.
Macabro, one of those guys. Somebody's doing it there.
Somebody's putting it out soon.
It feels like something that might have been up your alley. It had a real, knocked me on my ass, the effect of it.
Yeah, that Steadicam rigs.
Oh my God. And that's a Polish animator, filmmaker, I think, the guy who shot all that. He had won an Oscar. The DP of the film had won an Oscar as a director, as a Polish, and I think it was live action animation, kind of like Spunkmeyer type stuff, and just the way it just moves.
Yeah, it's amazingly shot.
But I've seen a lot of movies that try to get inside the mind of a killer or anything like that. This is the first film I'd ever seen where I literally felt like I had to take a breath afterwards, like you were almost holding your breath an entire movie with the character, and you weren't feeling what he felt, but you're with them so close. It's really unusual. I can see how Gaspar Noé's been trying to do that, but maybe a little less successful in that sense. Maybe a little too stylized, But anyway, that's a movie I always tell people if they can track it down. It's great. But it's not Severin, so it shouldn't be in this conversation.
Hey, no. I know we talked about it.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting.
But it is coming out from someone. I just forget who. I was talking to somebody recently, but it will be coming out finally in a decent edition.
Well, I'm excited that you're, making a film again.
Yes.
Or hopefully it's all going to... Do you have to go back and see your friend? Did he survive the accident, or did things go badly in London? Who did the black magic?
Oh, Skip, yeah.
Did he survive, or Skip had gone?
Skip, the principal warlock who was responsible for everything that happened, And because Skip did the magic to fix the meeting with Brando and get me back on the project when... Roman Polanski was attached.
Now, can we hire Skip for personal...
Well, we don't know if Skip's alive.
Is Skip still with
He
us?
is very much alive.
Oh, yeah. Thank God. Does he have Twitter?
He's on the net.
You can email him. I'll give you his email.
We should get him on the show, guys.
Very interesting to have on. It might be tricky to understand him at times. But,
yes, tell him what happened.
I'll tell him what happened, yeah. Skip was, the best, the most efficient practicing warlock I'd ever known. I mean, I only got involved with him on Moreau because he'd fixed a friend of mine's cigarette company. I had a friend who used to run a company called Death Cigarettes, which was like a black pack with skull and bones.
It says what it is from the start.
In an early cut of
selling death, the ad line was "Give up."
What's the name?
No, it was good. We had one of his adverts in an early cut of Lost Soul because he talks about how and their adverts were really cool.
Anyway, Death is being forced
there used to be a movie about that. I can't even. It had Dudley Moore in it, I think, but it was about a guy
the
who...
honest advertising.
And
I
can't even.
It had the horror film, and to the kids it said, "This movie won't just scare you; it'll fuck you up for life."
Yeah,
that was the advertising.
I can't remember the name of the movie, but that's what it reminded me of.
Anyways, so Death was being forced out of business by some larger tobacco cartels, and my friend who owned Death called Skip, and Skip convened his coven and cut his arm and drew a sigil, and within 24 hours, outside investors whom my friend had never met contacted him and refunded his company to the tune of $1 million. Wow. Actually, it was £1 million sterling.
Wow.
So Skip was quite efficient. Over the years, we'd tested him in various ways. He'd conjured a storm once to try and prove his powers to us, and a bolt of lightning had hit the office where he'd just stopped working a little while before, and he had a problem with his employers, and of course they were struck by lightning. So Skip had, he was a very, very, very smart man. He'd been to medical school. He'd been through dentistry school. He'd learned hypnotism in dentistry school, so he could put people under really easily. He'd been initiated into voodoo in Jamaica. He had a very good command of both maths, physical chemistry, but also ancient languages, Hebrew, hieroglyphs, Greek, Latin, etc. Very cross-disciplinarian, very good biochemist. Anyway, post Moreau, obviously what happened on Moreau was that Skip's body started to disintegrate. He claimed that he'd been accidentally irradiated in an accident in his laboratory, something to do with the thickness of the clay wall. And his bones started to rot, and he got into hospital, had 2 hip replacements, caught a flesh-eating parasite in hospital, necrotizing fasciitis that nearly killed him. Got out of hospital about 2 years later, addicted to painkillers very heavily, and then went into rehab. And then after about a year in rehab, had taken over as the rehab counselor, had taken the rehab counselor's job, then extended the rehab counseling business into a citywide network of counseling, where he then started using the people from rehab to rebuild his organization and to rebuild his coven. And
he's recruiting witches from rehab. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very similar to what happens in Philip K. Dick's Scanner Darkly. And Skip has then since then built himself back up into a position of power and is now a personal assistant to the Dalai Lama.
Oh my God.
I want to make Skip's story. This is great.
Well, the problem is you ask him for an interview, you'll get a long email back, which makes absolutely no sense to anybody at all. So we tried many times but does that mean, yes, you'll do an interview and then a bunch
he actually
more
did
stuff?
want to do the interview. He just put it in such a long-winded format. It was difficult for us to understand.
Very difficult for us to decipher, yeah. Yeah, we just ran out of time.
But that's
I couldn't
warlock
get it.
thing, I think, in general.
They're long-winded people.
I want Skip on Twitter.
Yeah,
for sure.
I want Skip on Twitter.
And Skip, I need a job.
His real name's Dr. Edward James Featherstone.
That's that's a big name.
Yeah,
He's living up to that name.
He's a character.
Well, let's hope he's on your side for the next film. But,
well, I haven't called Skip this time around.
Yet.
No, I figured we'd want to reproduce the experience.
It's a flawed process to ask a warlock to help you.
The magic thing here. If you actually read up on magic, what you send out in the world comes back. So if you fuck with somebody else's lives, you have to assume that something of yours is going to be fucked with as well. So
yeah, there seems to be some sort of negative burn on the thing, that's for sure, and that for every single little event that is changed according to an act of will, there does seem to be some kind of blowback.
Exactly. Yeah. Didn't you guys go through a phase when you were 14 where you read a whole bunch of witchcraft books? I did.
Did you watch The Craft?
Oh my God. That was the phase. I was like 14, and for Christmas one year, I asked my mom for all of these like Wicked and how to practice witchcraft books, and I sat there and read them, like the meditation stuff. So like 14-year-old me is learning how to picture a silver ball of energy floating around my body and all this stuff. But yeah, I read them cover to cover. So
there is a connection to The Craft.
Yes, Farouza Borg, obviously.
And she's actually one of the most, one of the things I like most about that documentary. I really loved how she's, an artist who wanted to be in a film by an artist, and that was really inspiring.
Yeah, she was very, very passionate about the subject.
If you haven't seen the film and you're at the end of this interview, go back,
watch the film.
I will recommend to see it
and
before.
then re-listen.
It's on VOD now. Are you putting out the DVD Blu-ray yourself on Severin?
Absolutely. We're not going through that again where we sell it to somebody who doesn't pay us. Yes, we're putting it out on Severin, DVD and Blu-ray. There'll be an extra special Blu-ray edition that will be limited and all that with extra stuff, and it is on VOD right now on Vudu, VHX, Xbox, Amazon, all those places. Yes,
and we have some listeners who are coming to see us at Texas Frightmare, because we've been telling them for a while. But David is also going to be at Texas Frightmare.
Yes, I am.
And you might have some screenings. We don't know yet.
We're going to be showing Lost Soul for sure.
Oh, okay,
so it'll be Lost Soul.
You should join us in Texas.
Shame you can stay for an extra month.
Yes, well, he might. You never know.
I reckon I will be.
Texas.
Yes,
you're invited then. Just
out of all of the horror conventions, Texas is like a weekend-long party.
It's amazing.
It's intense. Yeah. It's wonderful.
And Brad Dorff's going to be there. Who doesn't want to meet Brad?
And our old buddy Udo Kier is going to be there. So.
Eric's really excited about the boxing Helena.
Yeah, I can't wait to
I'm
be showing
curious.
Fred.
I would say I'm curious. I'm excited.
He's been
Having a
excited.
boxing Helena reunion.
Actually, a Richard Stanley boxing Helena could work.
I can see it.
I could see that.
Oh, fun to see Udo again.
Yes, absolutely. It's always fun to see Udo. But
Udo,
yeah.
I want to sleep with the ones the hat Kier.
Yeah.
Oh, I think most people in this industry have an Udo Kier story. I have to say, I've heard so many. I just can't repeat
He's
on
great.
air.
He is great.
But we will end with that.
But yeah, no. So we'll see you there, and so come in. All your films will be available on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everything.
And we'll definitely do a full-on Severin episode at some point in the not-too-distant future.
And just to
lovely.
connect, if people didn't connect the dots, we talked a few weeks ago about a film called Betamax that we did through
that's right,
Hollywood
yeah.
Underground, and David is the producer
Yes.
of Betamax, and we'll get more into that closer because it's still not done.
Yes, it's actually become quite a controversial ride. All I'll say is that basically, and actually Richard's in it briefly,
He's
but
fun.
all I'll say is it was a lot easier to work with the filmmakers who made The Theatre Bazaar. There's a couple of filmmakers on this one that it's not gelled quite as well as The Theatre Bazaar. We were more of a team on
But
The
I would
Theatre
say,
Bazaar.
from watching this, and that's why we put in the Underground, I'm really glad we did, because I didn't know if that would work out, because I hadn't seen it. But I think it's largely because you're also working with film video artists rather than professional film. In Theatre Bazaar, a lot of them are professional filmmakers, and there is a different style of working.
Apparently there is, yes.
So you just have to just chill, man.
Samurai Code of Honor or minimum standard of technical excellence.
Yes. But I mean, the Hollywood Underground was great fun because it was actually a perfect kind of guerrilla-y way to premiere the film. It wasn't quite finished. We were still shooting that afternoon. Blah blah blah. It was really fun.
That's
People
cool.
were drunk and all that kind of thing. But now it's got to be bloody finished. I mean, that's the thing that's become the problem.
And you're making now, sadly, I think the worst thing about modern cinema is, in a way, you're making these films knowing that the people watching it often are alone at home on VOD, which is a different way to experience a film. And to me, it's not an ideal way for a movie like that. But, we can have lots of parties for it.
That's
right.
Anyway, good luck finishing up. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for
Hopefully,
stopping.
we will
Pleasure.
talk to you guys
Pleasure.
again in Texas.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, all the best for the future.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, guys.